Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for February 9th, 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that the meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territories, and I would like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their lands. And at this time, I'd like to call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. And are there any changes to the agenda? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on the agenda. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you very much. And we have an agenda. Thank you very much. And moving on in our agenda, I see that we have no delegations this evening. And therefore, we're going to move on to a briefing from the chair. And I'd like to call upon Trustee Scott to provide her briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On Tuesday, the 23rd of February, the Education Foundation of Ottawa will be holding its annual Toonie Tuesday fundraising event. The funds raised will be used to support OCDSB students and families in need. And I have to say, sitting on the board of the foundation, the staff of the foundation have done absolutely incredible service this year, getting help out families of students who need that extra support. To mark this day, the foundation will be hosting a special virtual dance party with Ottawa's DJ Mace. So to learn more or donate, please visit the Education Foundation of Ottawa website. Secondly, on February the 25th, the OCDSB will be hosting a virtual event with Job Talks Executive Director, Dr. John Gallagher. He will share research and insights on the field of skilled trades. The discussion is for grade 8 to 12 students and their families. Advanced registration is required and more details available on the OCDSB website. A reminder then that the applications for student transfer requests must be submitted by the 16th of February. And also families have until February the 16th to register their children for Middle French immersion. And registration for virtual night school closes this Thursday, February the 11th. Again, more information on all these items can be found on the OCDSB website. And finally, on behalf of the board, we would like to send our very best wishes to all those in our community who are celebrating the Lunar New Year on Friday, February the 12th, with best wishes for a prosperous new year. And that concludes my briefing.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Are there any questions for the chair? And seeing no questions, let's move on to items 5 and I think 6 as well. Briefing from the Director and COVID-19 update. Madam Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Last week we marked the start of Black History Month. Students have been busy reflecting on the voices, realities, and the contributions of people of African descent, both in Canada and globally. The Sankofa Center for Excellence Graduation Coach Program is committed to advancing the academic success of African, Black, and Caribbean students in the OCDSB. From February until May, Sankofa will host a series of virtual workshops for secondary students. The Pathways to Excellence series will help students to learn about a variety of post-secondary opportunities. Please visit our website to learn more and register. On Friday, this coming Friday, there will be a PA day for all elementary school students. On this day, staff will receive training focused on equity and health and safety. Report cards will be available for elementary students on February 17th and secondary school students on February the 12th. The OCDSB is committed to a culture of innovation, and this involves inspiring students to discover. Last week, Ottawa-Carleton virtual students, OCV students, connected with NASA astronaut Michael Hopkins aboard the International Space Station. They had a chance to speak with him and ask him questions about life in space. I'd like to thank teacher Laurie McFarlane and the team at OCV for providing students with an out-of-world experience. And if I may, Chair, continue on into the COVID update. I'm just pulling it up, sorry. I'm working with two devices, I apologize. So our COVID update, COVID-19 update for today. First of all, case management. With schools back in person, the OCDSB COVID-19 dashboard is being updated daily. The dashboard is updated daily and provides the number of confirmed positive COVID-19 cases in OCDSB schools. The dashboard is updated after confirmation of a positive case has been received from Ottawa Public Health. Parents and staff will have been notified once this information is received, and required ministry reporting will have also been completed. In terms of COVID-19 testing clinics, a key component of the strategy to keep schools operating safely is an active testing program. Over the past 2 weekends, CHEO and Ottawa Public Health hosted COVID-19 test sites at École Gabriel Roy and at Ridgemont High School in Ottawa. The school sites were chosen based on testing priorities established by OPH. The school districts collaborate with OPH and CHEO to send invitation letters to all schools in the designated areas. The testing is for students, staff, family members, and community members associated with the schools. This coming weekend, OPH and CHEO are expanding the testing to the entire Barrhaven area. All schools in Barrhaven will be sending letters to families and to staff with information about the testing. We encourage the community to take advantage of this testing opportunity. The test for people without any symptoms will be a rapid test, which is less invasive and gives results on the same day. The test for people with symptoms of COVID-19 and or who have recently been exposed to someone with COVID-19 will be the rapid test along with a lab-based test. This week, Dr. Vera Etches will be with the OCDSB staff via a Zoom webinar. Dr. Etches will share highlights from the recent OPH report on COVID-19 in schools, discuss the importance of testing, and respond to questions that staff may have. Associate Director Brett Reynolds will join Dr. Etches for this virtual presentation. In terms of the self-assessment and verification process, as a part of the enhanced COVID-19 safety measures announced by the province, there is a requirement that all staff and secondary school students confirm daily that they have completed the COVID-19 self-screening prior to or upon arrival at school. The staff process is already in effect, and the process for secondary school students begins effective February 10th. Following the consideration of many different approaches, it was determined that verbal confirmation as a part of the daily attendance taking was the most accessible and reliable mechanism for student confirmation. Classroom teachers have been provided with information about the process. In specialized program classes with students who may not be able to complete the daily self-screening or confirmation themselves, the teacher will find a mutually acceptable way for parents and guardians to confirm that the self-screening has indeed been completed, either by phone, email, or daily log. And many questions are emerging regarding the vaccine rollout. As plans for vaccine rollouts continue, it is more important than ever to ensure that education workers are in fact considered a priority. The chair of the board has advised that she will she will be writing a letter to the Ministry of Education and the province and local health authorities to impress the urgency for confirmation that education workers will be given priority for the vaccine. Those are my two updates for today, Chair, and I will be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And I'm just wondering if there are any questions for the director. And I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you very much, Madam Director, and we'll move on to matters for action. Trustee Fisher, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm still getting familiar with this new Zoom, and it's the hands aren't where they used to be. The question I have for the director is, she can give us a sense of the timing for the letter that the chair at my request is drafting for the board to consider and then send to the individuals that she indicated.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Perhaps I'll turn it to Chair Scott, who has actually been working with Executive Officer Giroux around the timing. Chair Scott, would you care to respond to that?
Thank you for the question. What I have been doing is working on a draft, and what I was planning to do under new business was just to get a sense of how broad we want to make our ask with regard to vaccinations for education workers before I finalize it. As soon as I've completed the draft, it should be ready to go out before the end of this week.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. I didn't know you were going to do that under new business. That's great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any further queries? And seeing none, thank you very much. Let's move on to item number 7, matters for action. Item 7.1, report 21-006, school year calendar dates 2021-2022. And I'd like to call upon the director to introduce the report. Madam Director.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. With the indulgence of the Chair, I will have a little longer opening to this report than typical. Tonight, we're bringing forward the school year calendar report for action, as is our required annual practice before the Board of Trustees. The discussion about the school year calendar always signals the early preparation for the upcoming school year. And as we plan for this year, this upcoming school year, we do anticipate that we will be going into a school year with some continued contingencies that have been a part of this year's plan. We want to signal that we are maintaining a focus on safety as we go into the new 21-22 school year. We want to signal also that we will continue our commitment to well-being, and especially effective teaching and learning as we consider the possibilities of what the architecture of this new school year will look like. We're drawing on key lessons that we've learned from this past year, not just lessons learned in our district, but our team has already started to go beyond this jurisdiction to meet with other jurisdictions about how it is that their structures have worked, so that we are fully informed as we come together to draw up a plan for next year. We know that we need to be prepared to maintain a digital platform, and that some aspects of virtual instruction will need to be a part of the planning going into next year. We know that students have had varied learning experiences this year, and we must be prepared to meet these students where they are academically and from a well-being point of view when they return to us in the fall. Most of all, we have learned that being in school matters. It matters to our students, it matters to their families, it matters to our staff. We also know that predictability and stability matters in order to ensure well-being and mental health. We've also learned without question that social in-person engagements are very important to our community, to our staff, to our students, and to our board. And so as we continue to do our preparations for next year and we contemplate our school year calendar today, I wanted to signal to the Board of Trustees that we have already started to look at the full context of the school year, the structure that we anticipate having, and the fact that flexibility will continue to be required. So with that, I will turn it to Superintendent Toej, who has done a lot of the legwork in the engagements and the collaborations and the consultations that have gone into the development of a plan that we would like to bring forward to you tonight for the calendar, which is one component of the planning for next year. So over to you, Superintendent Toej.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So if we think about key structures around school year calendar, we are always governed by Regulation 304 in the Education Act, and that would frame out the number of school days that were required, when they need to take place. So in that case, we need to have 194 school days between September 1st and the end of June, and how many instructional days we're required to have, and that's 187. The framework from the ministry always identifies as well placement of things like winter breaks and March breaks. A district always has the opportunity to shift those, but those frameworks are set in place as well. So as shared by the director, I wanted to share some of the key aspects of the importance of the school year calendar. So the school year calendar isn't simply a legislative requirement or an operational component. It allows us to begin the key operational focus for the 21-22 school year, which is to set up the calendar in our Trillium, in our student information system. More importantly, it signals to our students who work during the summer, when's the first day of school? When, if I'm looking for part-time work, what are the timelines in there? It tells our parents when they can have the start and the end of the school year. And it identifies for our families the placement of those 7 mandated PA days. And we know for some of our families, that is key in terms of planning for the school year. But it isn't simply a school year calendar. It actually sets up the framework for student achievement, student learning, and student well-being. When we meet in our consultative committee, we focus on those areas entirely. We look at the placement of the PA days, we look at the focus of the PA days, and how they will best support the structure for learning for our students. So the first thing I did want to share that you'll notice in our draft school year calendars is we do have a PA day taking place prior to the Labor Day weekend. And that is because it is the only way that we can meet our requirements for 194 school days without having our students come prior to the Labor Day weekend. In addition, the other important aspect is to think of who is at the table and who is part of our voice when we create the school year calendar drafts. So we have parent voice between OCASC and PIC. We have student voice from Student Senate and the Council of Student Co-Presidents. We have all of our employee groups represented with their federation of representatives. We have all of our departments representatives and school administrators as well. And this was probably one of the most consistent school year calendars that we've been able to put together in terms of both consistency in decision-making at our district level and as well with our coterminous board. And as always, when we have shared transportation cost, it's really important that we have alignment as much as possible with our coterminous board. The other piece I did want to share is in terms of the time frame for school year calendar. So I did want to share that not only are we going through this process in the City of Ottawa, but our Eastern Ontario school districts as well are moving forward with the planning for the 21-22 school year. On Folio 1 and Folio 2, you'll see the draft recommendations for the school year calendar, both at the elementary and secondary levels. And I did want to highlight for our Board of Trustees that one of the things you will notice is an unequal balance at elementary and secondary with the number of district priority PA days and the number of ministry priority PA days. And so I just wanted to explain where that comes from. So we are required within our 7 PA days to have 3 ministry priority days. And those are really, really important focus days that all of our elementary and secondary educators take part in. So if you think about the areas of focus, they would typically be a focus on equity, human rights, Indigenous education, support for student well-being, support for our students with autism, anti-bullying, and this coming school year, we fully anticipate a focus on mathematics because we will be rolling out a brand new de-streamed grade 9 math curriculum. So separate from those 3 ministry priority days, there are a number of days at the elementary panel which have been determined based on provincial contract. And so we have a number of days that are focused on assessment and evaluation and report card writing, whereas at the secondary panel, there are more district priority days. So I did want to explain that to the Board of Trustees. And so finally, what you will see in terms of the breakdown of the 2 calendars, you will also notice that more of our PA days are focused in the earlier part of the year. Historically, we have had a PA day later in the school year around April, and I did want to explain for the Board of Trustees the reason that we're not doing that, and that if you look at the rollout of the calendar and the placement of March break and Easter, you'll see a natural, beautiful distance between the placement of Easter and March break. So we weren't required to put a PA day there. And so from a learning perspective and a well-being perspective, what we're excited about is we can really focus at that start of the year with all of our employees to focus on those areas that I highlighted between that first half of the school year. So thank you very much through you, Chair.
And thank you very much, Superintendent Tuage. And we do have a question from Trustee Lara. Go ahead, Trustee Lara.
So I'm looking at the calendars and I see that the first district priority PD day at elementary comes in February, ditto at secondary. I'm wondering how the decision to put all of the district priorities in the second semester was made, and why we don't have any of the district priorities in the first couple.
Thank you very much through you, Chair. And thank you, Trustee Lyons, for the question. So again, as I shared, most of the days that are district priorities are actually determined by the ministry and based on provincial contracts. And so the placement of those days are typically tied to things like parent interviews or report card writing. The ministry priority days, although they're called ministry priority days, these are exactly the things that we would focus on as a district, focusing on the work around human rights, Indigenous education, support for students with autism and anti-bullying is exactly the work that we would be focusing on as a district. So they happen to be Ministry of Education priorities, but they are very much at the core of our strategic plan that was supported and passed by our Board of Trustees.
So I would say that when it comes to, for example, math or human rights and equity, I would be okay pushing the math PA day further into the year because I would want to prioritize human rights and equity. But we don't have any ministry PA days in the second half of the year. And I'm wondering, is there anything preventing us from pushing one of our district priorities closer to the beginning and pushing something that we might say is less of a priority from the ministry list later into the year.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Trustee Evans. We have one of the most complicated years in mathematics that we are about to walk into in the 21-22 school year. This is only the second year of implementation of a brand new math curriculum at elementary. Every single one of our educators, grade 1 to 8, is implementing a brand new curriculum. They need that continued focus and that continued support with an early PA day. And at the secondary level, we are going to be implementing a brand new de-streamed math curriculum. And so we absolutely need to put in the supports for our educators at the start of the year. And that was a clear message from the entire committee, which includes, of course, all of our union partners and our union presidents. We need to be ensuring that our educators have the supports, the PD, and the training that they need so that they have the skills and the tools to support our students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Evans. And assuming that you are finished, we're going to move on to Trustee Schwartz. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I merely wanted to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. And do you have an introduction?
I don't think any is needed. I think Superintendent Tawaj gave us a very full briefing this evening and very much support the rationale behind the decisions for the calendar.
Thank you very much. And moving on then to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one quick question, and that is about the 2 days in the secondary school calendar for district priorities on the 2nd and the 18th. Are both of those on general topics, or is one of them associated with the switch from the first to the second semester?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Scott. So one of the things that was highlighted by Trustee Scott is a change to our school year calendar. And so what was decided was that we were going to look at the opportunity from a student success perspective, rather than focusing on 3 PA days at the end of the school year, to have one of the PA days that takes place after the first semester, to focus on promotion, to focus on student success initiatives based on that initial first semester. And then the second day on February 18th, Trustee Scott, that is the day that our federations take the lead for their professional development. And so the best way to think of it is that February 2nd would be a principal and department run PA day around student success. And the February 18th day would be one that we work in partnerships with all of our federations to lead their own professional learning that day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And I see that Trustee Lyra still has her hand up. Did you have an additional question, Trustee Lyra?
No, it was
Okay.
hanging.
Oh, okay, no problem. Sticky fingers, understand. So we're going back to Trustee Schwartz for wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think much wrap up is required. It's a fairly straightforward item, and I'm happy to be supporting it this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to rely, I think, tonight on eScribe for voting on this. And so, Manager Guthrie, if you could set up the vote for this, and the motion is on your eScribe.
Keith, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lara. It's not only, I'm also, I thought the space bar would work, but obviously it doesn't work for that long. So anyway, we're going to move on to report 21-015, extended day program and infant, toddler, and preschool program daily fee rates for the 2021-2022
Mr. Chair,
school year.
before we can continue, could you please announce the vote?
Oh, sorry. It was unanimous, 10 votes for.
Just, sorry, point of order, Mr. Chair. I noticed that in the vote tally, I think there may have been an error. I don't think there are 13 trustees.
You are correct.
Okay. Thank you. Just to note for the record.
Through you, Chair, just to qualify that accounting, the student trustees are listed as voting members and need to be removed as voting members. So they were there, but I marked them as absent, so they could not participate in the vote. So we will clarify and correct that in the next committee of the whole meeting. And Trustee Ellis, I did not capture a vote from you, and I can certainly go back and change that.
Yeah, it's not popping up. I have eScribe open and it was happening the last meeting. I'm not getting the thing. So yes, I voted in favor. We'll address this at another time.
I do have
a meeting.
I do have a concern.
Thank you, Trustee Ellis. Go ahead, Trustee Lara.
It didn't pop up who voted and who abstained. Like nothing popped up on the screen to tell the public who voted and who abstained.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I will make sure that I display the vote after it is closed on the next vote.
Again, point of order,
Okay,
Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if that's required for a COW meeting or if that is simply a recorded vote for a board meeting.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. We refer that matter to Manager Executive Officer Giroux. What is the requirement, Executive Officer?
Ask the manager. I think the trustee is correct that at board it's a recorded vote, but at committee we don't list the names of all members. I appreciate the trustees' patience as we work through. We are just piloting this initiative, and we'll take your comments and feedback back, and we'll put out a memo to you with some updates on some of the features and functionality.
If I might respond.
Go ahead, Trustee Lara.
In an in-person board meeting, or even at an in-person COW, our hands are all up. It is public information. We don't record it in the minutes, but I think to not have it available at all is a failure of our responsibility to be accountable to the public.
Okay, I think that Manager Guthrie is dealing with that by going to be displaying the vote afterwards. She did not do that this time, but she said that she would do that in the future. So that's how we'll fix this problem.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Campbell, did you have something to add?
I endorse that. I think it's important information, not just for the sake of the public, but it's important information for trustees. I find it crucial to know who's supporting what, who tends in what direction, where abstentions lie, etc. at the committee level. So this is just important information for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And so, as I said, Manager Guthrie is going to endeavor to put the vote up on the screen so that we maintain the utmost level of transparency moving forward. So thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to report 21-015, extended day program and infant, toddler, preschool daily fee rates. I'd like to call upon the director to introduce the report.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So we do have a report here for trustees. I'm seeking the approval of an increase to the daily fee rate for the extended day program and infant toddler program. Superintendent Dua is with us to take us through that report, and he is joined by Manager Sear, who is here to support any questions that might emerge from trustees. So I will pass it to Superintendent Dua at this time.
Thank you, Director. Before you, trustees, report number 210015 seeks approval for increase of basic daily rates for 2021-2022 extended day programs operated by the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. The Ministry of Education requires school boards to charge and collect fees for EDP to recover the operating cost. By the start of May each year, school boards are required to provide the fees for before and after school programs to parents and guardians and post them on the district website. Staff is recommending that the basic rate of for 2021-2022 be set at $23 per day for those who attend full day, every day, 5 days a week for both morning and afternoon. The fee rate of $23 per day reflects a 50-cent increase from the current fee of $22.50. The fee is based on projected salary and wage rates, supplies, toys, snack costs, plus allowance for administrative overhead and additional support for children with special needs. The rate also includes an allowance to cover additional costs associated with the new health and safety related operational guidance. Fee rates in the OCDSB have not changed since 2017 due to budgetary surplus for fees and subsidies. Over the past year, the revenue for the extended day has significantly been impacted. COVID-related closures and reduced enrollment from 6,200 to 1,400. The increased cost of supplies such as foods, toys, and daily operation. The reopening costs increased due to new operational guidance to ensure the health and safety of all, and the increased ratios due to new staffing requirements, additional staff for screening and running. These have resulted in a budgetary shortfall. We no longer enjoy the surplus that we had for 5 years and alleviated the need to increase fees. OCDSB continues to offer the most board-operated extended day programs in the province. To continue to offer the number of programs across the district and move the programs towards a full cost recovery, staff is also recommending an increase for a full day of care for PA days, winter breaks, and March breaks to $37 per day. A cost of living increase of 1.5% for daily fees for OCDSB infant and toddler rate increases to $67 a day, and the preschool rate increase to $49.75 a day. These program rates have not been increased since 2017. Consultation with the City of Ottawa confirms that the proposed rates is within the subsidy rate for full-time attendance and is consistent with the Ottawa-Carleton School Board's proposed fee rate. It should be noted that Report 21-015 was presented to an advisory committee on extended day and childcare programs at its meeting on the 27th of January 2021, and the committee is in support of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Dua. And we do have a few questions, and we're going to move to Trustee Campbell.
And there we are. Thank you very much. I do have a few questions, actually. Great report, very interesting. Thank you. First of all, in terms of the cost recovery angle, has the province effectively for the current year, and I guess the previous one, giving boards a pass if they go into deficit, and in fact they're basically use their deficit monies to cover program costs rather than requiring cost recovery? Have we received a clear message that way?
To you, Chair, the simple answer is no.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. In terms of within the range of what the City of Ottawa is willing to pay, and I think that was in your intro. Thank you. are our rates, is to say our proposed rates are within the range, subsidy range they're willing to pay? Are we pegged at the very top end of that range, or are we currently less than they would their top?
Through you, Chair, I'd like to refer this question to Manager Sear.
Thank you, Superintendent Dua, and through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. The current rate or the increased rate puts us in line of the medium range of childcare before and after school program rates for the City of Ottawa. So we're neither in the low end and we're neither in the high end.
Great, thank you. And the infant toddler, the same?
It is. It's absolutely the same. We're right in the middle.
So can I ask why, if we're in the middle and they would be willing to pay a higher subsidy for infant toddler, we're projecting we're not looking at cost recovery for infant toddler. They're willing to pay more. We're only in the middle range with respect to those rates. Why are we not contemplating a higher increase?
Because we do have a contribution agreement with the City of Ottawa, and because we receive general operating funding for our subsidized spaces, we're only allowed to increase our fees up to the cost of living. And considering that the daily per diem rate for infant and preschool is still a considerable rate, moving to 1.5 can be more absorbed by families to absorb an increase, but also not affect our contribution agreement clause that we have with the City of Ottawa.
Great, thank you. I think the infant toddler, this has been raised several times. We're going to have to re-examine the infant toddler program and its place strategically, I think, in the school board. We're constantly incurring basically it's a we're subsidizing each infant toddler participant, if there's 67 of them right now, to the tune of about $6,000 per head. So I do think we have to look at that, and I'll be potentially bringing forward motions to that effect in coming weeks and months. I do have another question with respect to one of the appendices. I think it was in Appendix A. And there were no rates provided for Terry Fox, and it's offered in mornings only. So obviously it's a bit of a special situation. Could I just understand, are rates still TBD, or the program's not being offered, or?
Terry Fox, excuse me, through you, Chair. Terry Fox, we're operating an AM program only because we had identified 3 families that needed a service in the morning, because the afternoon program is operated by the City of Ottawa, and it's a rec program. So that's why the rates are different, and that's why the program is different.
So but there are no rates posted. They're still TBD, or?
Currently, we're closed because there's no registration. So we'll have to identify if next September, whether we'll still have families that want the service for the morning program.
And last question, in terms of the rates and the dollar projections, I'm noticing that the extended day program is effectively the estimated surplus nicely just covers the expected deficit in the infant toddler program in terms of the projection used. But I guess, can you get a little bit background in terms of how you came out with these projected revenues? And also where the 49, 75, and 67 came from. I didn't see in the report that we were necessarily OCSB matching there. So I'd just like to understand effectively where the projections came from and where those numbers came from. And I'm done. Thank you.
So in regards, through you, Mr. Chair, in regards to the projections, we had established that our extended day program would potentially next year operate at 65% of what we operated when we had full capacity back in September 2019. Same principle for our ITP program. We used an estimated rate at around 85% because we do understand that next year being potentially another or a different year, that we would do our assumptions based on those percentages.
And in terms of the rates, are we doing OCSB matching for the preschool, and where did the 67 come from?
The $67 a day? Sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
I guess that's just the 1.5, but the 49, what is it, 75, is that simply OCSB matching with their preschool program?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And moving on to Trustee Lara.
I suppose I'll move the motion. I do have some questions, though.
Go ahead,
So
Trustee Lara.
my first question is, will this work if we have more than 75, or will this still balance if we get 80% or 100% of last year's numbers? Will it still work if we only get 40%? What's the range that these numbers are going to work for? And still come out without running a deficit?
Thank you, through you, Chair. The number of registrants and the number of staff follow a formula based on legislative ratio. So the higher your registration, the higher staff contingency that you would need. So then you would change your percentages for cost of food and supplies. So yes, it would, the numbers would fluctuate, but they would still stay within the same ranges.
Okay. Are we at this time looking at an increase the year after next year? What does our 2 or 3 year projection look like if we approve this increase this year?
Through you, Chair, I'll start with that. We were fortunate within the last 5 years to have a surplus, which alleviated us from increasing due to cost of living. Right now, as it stands, we do not have access to that surplus. And so in order to be cost efficient and be viable, we had to increase the align with the cost of living. And so the possibility of what happens next year, there's a lot of factors come into play. There's the factors that come into play also around what we receive from the government and how that affects the bottom line.
So we have no projections past next year about what our prices might have to be. Is that what you have said?
Through you, Chair, I know that CFO Carson is on, and I'd like to refer this to CFO Carson.
Mr. Chair, I think our single biggest cost driver is the cost of staffing, and ECEs are covered by the existing collective agreement. So we'll see a salary increase for them. So it would be reasonable to expect that part of that would flow through to a fee increase once we get to a normal year. The factor that's always hard to predict is whether we finish a year with a surplus or a deficit. Sometimes isn't just the number of students, but where in the programs they've attended. So depending on whether the ratios work perfectly at some areas, one center might make money. We might have some others that don't. So I expect that for at least the next 2 years, we'll see a modest increase of 1% to help cover those compensation costs. And then we'll have to monitor it for other operating changes. But it's always subject to an annual review.
Okay. I was trying to gauge whether I should tell the community to expect gradual increases over the next couple of years, or if it was just going to be one step up. Thank you for answering my questions. That's all.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lara. And we're moving on to Trustee Ellis. Go ahead, Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. First, let me state that at the last extended day program committee meeting, advisory committee meeting, there was consensus in support of raising the fees. And now for a question. you know, I guess it's fortunate in one way that there is a surplus in this department to cover the unusual year that we had. But if we didn't have COVID, I would expect that we would still have that surplus. So I'm wondering, when we go back to normal, we've been having a surplus. Is the expectation that we'll start to rebuild that surplus with this increase in the fee structure? Or is this just to cover costs of inflation? I'm not sure. It troubled me that we had a surplus and a continually growing surplus in this program when it's supposed to be cost recovery. If I get just a guess at the future, I guess.
You, Chair. Thank you very much, Trustee Ellis. The goal is to be cost effective and to be cost recovery. The goal is not to have a surplus or to have a deficit.
Yeah, my question is, we had been accumulating a surplus. COVID came in and it took away that surplus. But if we hadn't had COVID, would we be looking at an increase this year because we had been naturally eating into that surplus?
To you, Chair. Trustee Ellis, we did have the discussion last year that we were looking at a possibility of a cost of living increase this year because we were eating into the surplus.
In the rate of, like, how much was the surplus and what would we have eaten it? Like, was it 5 million and we would have seen a natural decline of 1 million, or is that in the ballpark?
I'd like to refer this to CFO Carson, please.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think we had, over the life of the program, had accumulated a surplus that was headed towards, I believe it was about $500,000 in round numbers. I don't know, some of the factors that contributed to that were unique and were not going to be continuing. It was being driven by better and higher growth in our enrollment in the program than we had ever anticipated. It also reflected the fact that for many of the programs on many weeks of the year, we were always playing catch up with staffing. And so there were often times when our staffing was being managed not with full-time staff, but with casual staff. That ends up saving us money. So one of the first things that Ms. Zare looked at when she joined us was trying to get some of those staffing issues sorted out. You'll remember that we were able to hire, I forget the title, but it's an operating officer in early learning who has been able to work more closely with supervisors to make sure that we do have the appropriate number of staff. So I think what you'd have seen in normal years would have been sort of the normal small surplus, small deficit, depending on enrollments and depending on unusual things like sick leave and, but you would not have seen a continued increase in the surplus. So I hope that answers the question. I think we would have hoped that we would get to a stage where we were running plus or minus a small surplus or deficit, and that we wouldn't need increases beyond those that might cover the increased cost of labor. Thanks.
Thank you. That was very helpful. 500,000 is a lot of money to individuals. To an organization as large as ours, it's not much. I know we do have some increases coming, so I'll be supportive of this increase. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ellis. And moving on to Ms. Trent, go ahead.
Hi, in your report, in the report it was mentioned that you had increased spending for special needs. Can you explain to me what you're actually doing? Because to my knowledge, you use ELAs, which are not trained to do special needs. ECEs do not have the training that is needed for many of the special needs that attend EDP. So can you explain how that money is being used?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the question. And through you, Mr. Chair, the way that we help support our children that have special identified needs is, yes, we do hire extra staff, and we do the same model as children's inclusion support services and our third-party providers receive, is that we have enhanced staff support, which means is that we have reduced the number of the ratio between the number of adults and children, so all educators can work together with the children. And ECEs, registered early child educators, do have certain training, and they do have the responsibility based on their professional college designation to work with children with special education needs. But there's not just that. There's also the fact that we do help the team between the core day and the before and after school to have multidisciplinary team meetings. So the strategies and the supplies, or sometimes even the equipment, and sometimes even the staff are shared. What happens during the day will happen for before and after school. So it's a team effort. It's not a situation like in the core day with, at some occasions, you would have an EA with a child individually, but there is also situations where you have EAs that help support a number of children and a number of educators, and they work together as a team. And that's the same focus that we have in the afternoon. So the requirements also for children before and after school is different than it is during the core day. The intents and purposes are different amongst the two programs. There's a continuum, but they are not the same. So that's how we support our children with special identified needs, is by reducing the ratios, providing with training when needed, supporting with our LSS team and our multidisciplinary team during the school to really offer that continuum. So that does come at an added cost, and I can tell you that we spend a lot of time with our program supervisors and our educator teams to also support the family to understand what are the intents and purposes for the before and after school program, and how we can try and ensure that there is that flow during the day.
Thank you. That does differ a lot from what I'm hearing from the ECs, but thank you for your answer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trent. And moving on to Trustee Boothby.
Thank you, and thank you, Jean. You asked one of my questions. My second question is, do we know what percentage of our children that are in the infant, toddler, and preschool program are on subsidies?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the exact percentage, but I can tell you that our ITP program at Queenswood Heights has a higher number of subsidized families than we do at our infant, toddler, preschool program at Woodruff High.
Okay. Okay. So do we know? Are we having this program mostly for families that are on subsidies, or are they families with children also in our schools in EDP, or do we have any idea what that profile is of our clientele in the infant, toddler, and preschool?
Sure, and through you, Mr. Chair, at Woodruff High School, it's a bit different to tell if they're transitioning, but they would transition to a multitude of OCDSB schools within that area. The percentage, and I'm going to guesstimate, but I can get you those exact numbers, is probably around 50% of Woodruff would have subsidies. The infant, toddler, preschool program at Queenswood Heights, I would say the percentage is higher, around 70%, with the majority of the children that attend Queenswood Heights will be going to either Queenswood Heights or Queen Mary behind.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Boothby. And moving on to Trustee Bell.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm wondering about the timing of raising the fees, given that we are living through COVID, and it's really hit our communities, many of our communities, very hard, and they've lost significant funds, working gigs and other precarious work situations. So if we have the opportunity to hold off, I'm wondering how, for another year until the economy starts to recover, I'm wondering how great the financial impact on our school board would be. That's my question, but then I also have to admit that I believe that I may be perceived to be in a conflict of interest regarding this, because I do have a daughter that goes to EDP, so I do pay these fees, but my question does not pertain to my specific circumstance. Thanks.
To you, Chair. Thank you very much for the question, Trustee Bell. We meet monthly with some other boards that have the similar childcare programs that we run, and it just to a school, to a board, every board has had to cut down the number of EDP programs that they're running. We opened up this year with 66 programs, a full complement of programs. We've been intentional not to close any programs to make sure that parents have access to childcare. And so in order to maintain the program, be viable, and be able to support our families, and be able to continue on as we plan to support our families in the way we have been doing, it felt that it was necessary to increase by a minimal 50 cents the cost of living increase, and to keep the programs running. Our board also has a policy that requires us to open a program when there's 3 children are interested in the program, which is also very different from other boards. And so in certain situations, we have programs running where we have 2 adults and 3 children. And so this is all part of our board philosophy in terms of making sure we have space available for families. And so this is part of the decisions that we have to do in order to keep those programs viable.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Dua, for your clarification. I will be abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Bell. And moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you. Just one question, because most of mine have been asked already. When we look at the difference in fees between the third-party providers and our own programs, I guess the one thing I would like to be assured is that the quality and general content of all of the programs is still in line with all of the ministry guidelines, whether it's our own EDP or whether it is the third-party programs.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Chair, we're legislatively required to follow our early years pedagogy, How Does Learning Happen, which clearly outlines the quality of care that we're looking for. And whether you are a third party that's legislatively bound through a license, or you're legislatively bound by the Education Act, like our extended day program, we are required to follow policies and procedures procedures that are clearly outlined, and the same principle as our early years pedagogy. So in that regard, systematically throughout the OCDSB, whether you're a third-party provider or whether you're a Board 1 program, you're required by law to follow the similar policies and procedures, but the same early years pedagogy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And I see that Ms. Trant still has her hand up. Did you have a further question, Ms. Trant?
No, sorry, I just forgot to take it down.
No problem. Just checking. And that, seeing no further questions, I'm going to turn it back to Trustee Lyra for wrap up.
No wrap up required.
Okay, thank
No
you
wrap
very
up
much.
required.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on to calling the question on this. And we're going to go to our e-scribe, and you can also see the recommendations. If you could put those recommendations up on the screen. Oh, the recommendations are on the e-scribe. And I might remind trustees, if it's not popping up, you can do it via private chat to Manager Guthrie. And thank you very much. That's concluded. And I'm just wondering if we can get that on our screen, Manager Guthrie. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. So the vote is carried. And I think that's clear enough for everyone. Thank you. So 9 in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstaining. All right. Thank you very much, trustees, for that. And moving on to agenda item number 8, matters for discussion. Report 21-014, analysis of disproportionality and disparity in grade 10 credit accumulation. And I'd like to call upon the director to introduce this discussion report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So this report is the second in a series that integrates the identity-based data project and cross-references it with aspects of our programming, but also responding to questions that have emerged as we started this project over a year ago. One of the questions around the identity-based project, or the collection of identity-based information that the community wanted to have answered, is around trends and impacts pertaining to identity as it is cross-referenced with achievement and graduation rates. So in this report, there is the opportunity to explore how that data essentially unfolds to give us a picture into how it is that groups and cohorts of students are in fact achieving and succeeding in our district, and the cross reference to where identity trends emerge. So at this point, I would like to turn it to Executive Officer Giroux. You will see that Superintendent Tawaj and Hardy are also joining, and we also have a number of members of the team, Executive Officer Giroux's team, here to help with the response to the questions, as it is quite a complex undertaking. And before I do turn it over, I do want to publicly express my appreciation to Executive Officer Giroux and the READ team in particular, led by Manager Orchesky, because the complexity of this undertaking is quite a feat indeed. And so I do very much appreciate the work that has been done, and really want to highlight the fact that this team has undertaken to ensure fidelity with the expectations and standards from the ministry, in addition to responsiveness to the community. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over, please, to Executive Officer Giroux and her team.
Thanks very much. And I think the director has done a lovely job introducing the report and the presentation. We have a PowerPoint presentation for you tonight. As the director indicated, this report focuses on credit accumulation. And I absolutely agree with her that a report of this magnitude takes many hands. And I have to just really call out the work of the READ team, who have been on a tremendous learning journey about using identity-based data and understanding disproportionality and disparity, and how we report on those things to you. And you will continue to see the evolution of our understanding as we learn and grow in this area. Tonight's presentation will demonstrate not just that excellent work, but how much collaboration and integration there is between departments. This data analysis is generated by the READ team, but the strategies and the implementation are the work done by our program and learning, our innovation and adolescent learning department, and of course by the staff in all of our schools. So Superintendent Touage is going to introduce the student achievement components. Manager Oracheski and Research Officer Vatanshov will speak to the data analysis, and Superintendent Hardy and Principal Laverne will speak to some of the specific strategies that are being used in supporting adolescent learning and really supporting our student success model. So I'll hand it over to Superintendent Touage.
Through you, Chair. So the review of credit accumulation is not only integral to our district's commitment to the creation of culture of innovation and culture of caring, it also has been a key indicator of the Ministry of Education Student Success Learning to 18 initiatives since 2003. What is important to know about this idea of credit accumulation at grade 10 is that what is being demonstrated across the province is that this is a key indicator around likelihood of graduating within 5 years. So often it's known as 16 by 16, so 16 credits by the end of age 16. In terms of the work that we do in terms of our board improvement plan for student achievement, our school improvement plans for student achievement, it has continued to be a key metric for our progress as a district, both at the district and at the school level, and absolutely essential information for the work in our high schools with our student success in terms of credit rescue, credit intervention, re-engagement as we work to do very precise interventions to help our students get back on track. In terms of our framework for analysis, in terms of this analysis, it's followed the same methodology used by the province and the Ministry of Education in terms of student success learning to 18. And that's really important so that we're able to compare the achievement of our students across the province of Ontario. And as shared earlier, this is also key information that we've used in our past historical ASARs, our annual student achievement reports. With the introduction of ARA, so the Anti-Racism Act in 2017, and the accompanying data standards, initial analysis are required, and specifically to calculate both disproportionality and in terms of disparity, to better understand the magnitude of either the over or underrepresentation of particular identities in a particular program, as well as differences in outcomes between groups of students. Additionally, staff are continued to be guided by the QuantCrit framework, and we need to be mindful that results can be interpreted differently based on the experiences that individuals have had in their worldview. And finally, The other piece in the way that the analysis has been done is that you'll see that in this report, the data has been presented in a variety of ways to mirror what we've done in the past, but most importantly, to show what will become mandatory in 2023 in terms of ARDS. So when we think about the overview of the percentage of our students in grade 2 who earn that 16 by 16, this graph shows the achievement over the past 5 years. And that would be based on the full population of our grade 10 students. For our trustees, it's important to know that approximately the cohort size on any given year would be about 5,500 students that would be in grade 10. And so what you'll see is our rates are relatively stable during that period of time, with a low of 79% in 17-18 and a high of 83% in the 2019-20 school year. When we compare our district rates to those of the province, they would be very comparable during that period of time. Additionally, it's important to know for our trustees that in terms of our preliminary data for Quadmester 1, it shows a very high credit accumulation rate for our students in grade 10, with 93% of our students earning the 2 credits that they were attempting. And certainly Superintendent Hardy will speak to the data much later in our presentation, and the importance of not simply comparing the achievement data based on 8 credits with that based on a Quadmester model. The next chart would really show the way that we historically have analyzed our data when we had disaggregated our data in the past. And so this would be based on our 2019-20 student achievement data and credit accumulation. So what you'll notice there in terms of our grade 10 accumulation rates for 2019-20, there's not a substantive difference in terms of the achievement outcomes for males and females, 82% versus 84%. But we do have variation, significant variation between other groups of students. So if we think about 64% of our students who self-identified as Indigenous would have earned their 16 by 16. And if we think about the number of students, that would be just over 60 students out of the 104 who self-identified in grade 10. If we think about our English language learners, they would be at 76% of those students earned their 16 by 16. And again, in terms of cohort size of that subgroup, that would work out to just over 900 of the 1,200 English language learners in grade 10. And the other piece to keep in mind is, although these rates themselves have fluctuated over time, these trends have persisted. And so the disproportionality between groups have persisted over time. Lastly, for our Board of Trustees, in terms of our students with special education needs, important to know that that 70% would be excluding our students identified as gifted learners. And in terms of our students residing in lower income neighborhoods at 74%, that would represent just about 1,000 of the 1,300 students. And at this point, I'll be passing it on to Manager Orocheski.
Thank you. So when we think about our credit accumulation data in relation to the demographic data collected through Valuing Voices, we are required to calculate disproportionality and or disparity indices. So in the slides that follow and in the report itself, both values have been calculated. An important distinction between the two, because it can be a little confusing, is disproportionality is a measure of a group's over or under representation in a program, service, or function relative to their representation in the population. And disparity is a measure of group differences. And so in both cases, a value of 1 reflects equal representation or equal likelihood of achieving an outcome. A value less than 1 indicates underrepresentation or a lower likelihood, and a value greater than 1 represents overrepresentation or greater likelihood. So for the analysis that we undertook, it was important that we not suppress data. And in order to do that, we pooled 3 years of grade 10 credit accumulation together. So the information presented on this slide is actually based on the pooled 3-year data for the full population of students, so that we have a comparative for the subset of students that will follow. And so for the district as a whole, the overall grade 10 credit accumulation not displayed on here was 81%. And that was for the pooled 3 years of data from 2017-18 through 2019-20. For the groups of students that we've typically tracked as part of the annual student achievement report, that's what you are seeing on the screen here. And so again, we can see that students who identified as Indigenous were the most significantly underrepresented, or shouldn't use the term significantly, sorry, most underrepresented in the data, and 0.7 times less likely than non-Indigenous students to be on track to graduate within 5 years. For many years, we've been hearing from students, parents, and community partners about concerns that racialized students, students of diverse gender identities, and students with disabilities face barriers to graduation. So when we looked at the subset of students for whom we had both grade 10 credit accumulation and Valuing Voices survey data, for each of the aspects of identity that we're looking at here, we had coverage of about 59% of the population. And so again, while the values may differ slightly from our full population of students on the previous slide, the trends are fairly consistent. We see that students who identify as First Nation, Métis, or Inuit are underrepresented in the grade 10 credit accumulation rate. Students who identify particularly with an undisclosed disability, with autism spectrum disorder and or addiction, again, are underrepresented. Those who identify as transgender, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, and not sure, also are underrepresented, and students who identify as Indigenous, Black, Middle Eastern, and Latino seem to be facing the greatest barriers. While this might be difficult to see on the screen, you'll see the same information on page 7 of Appendix A to the report. And this provides an overview for both the full population of Trillium groups of students, as well as the subset of students for whom we have both grade 10 credit accumulation and Valuing Voices data. And this shows the disproportionality rates for those students. And at this point, I will turn it back to Executive Officer Giroux.
So we often talk about the data and using the data to help identify patterns and trends. And we also talk about using data for different purposes and for different types of data and how it's impactful at different levels. And so what we wanted to do tonight is sort of give you that overview about the sort of big picture report, which allows us to monitor progress, and then talk about how that connects to the work that we're doing in schools and led by the central departments in terms of shifting our practice and making change happen. And so what guides that work? Our strategic plan. Those priorities are really instrumental in guiding how we approach some of those strategies. The Indigenous Equity and Human Rights Roadmap lays a path forward that helps us very specifically get at some of these issues. We have a wide range of student success initiatives underway and the breadth and scope of those I think will be of interest to you. And then we've been playing around using some real-time data to support student achievement. And when we use that real-time data, we don't have the same breadth and depth as we have in this kind of report, but we can use that to keep an eye on where things are going. And so I'm going to hand things over to Superintendent Hardy, who's going to speak to you in a little bit more detail about the student success initiatives that are underway and how we see those things helping us take this data and inform our practice to make those necessary shifts.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So in terms of some of the key strategies and next steps with regards to the strat plan and the Indigenous Equity and Human Rights Roadmap, as you all be aware that we have Indigenous and Black student graduation coaches in place who are already doing terrific work, and we got a chance to hear from them today, and they're bringing tremendous voice to the table, which is greatly appreciated. In terms of summer learning programs, last year we launched under the leadership of Superintendent Smith a program for Indigenous students in the summer, which was a great success, and so that's being expanded with the addition of a program for Black students this summer as well. The Student Achievement Through Equity Inquiry, you will recall, is a project that will continue to build on bringing children, families, and communities together in the educational environment in order to make the school the heart of the community. And finally, the strategic plan and roadmap also outlines some of the key strategies, and part of that will include the establishment of an annual equity accountability report, which will be included in the annual director's report. And some of the key measures there will be measures including graduation rates disaggregated by grade, indigeneity, race, language, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and socioeconomic status. So we thought we'd give you just a sort of a brief overview tonight of some of the key strategies that we're using in student success at the moment, and certainly happy to answer questions afterwards or provide additional information. So far today, we've spent $74,000 in the district to support for occasional teachers to support schools in ensuring that students are getting those credits and that the credit completion rate continues to go up. It's also the case over the last few years that we've moved from what was really a per capita amount for schools to a more differentiated model. And this is helping us to be a bit more targeted in terms of making sure the resources are getting to where they need to go. So for example, at the end of each quadmester, the schools that have ELD programs have been receiving additional funding to support occasional teachers to help students. Another important initiative we wanted to tell you about was a group that we lovingly refer to as G8, which is 8 high schools. So they are Ridgemont, Woodruff, Brookfield, Hillcrest, Gloucester, Bell, OTSS, and Sir Guy. And those are schools where we see that we have large numbers of underserved students, and also schools that have sometimes had credit attainment, which has been below the board average. And so we've been working very closely with those schools for the last just over a year now, including providing experiential learning PD in terms of using that to build equity in the schools. And we saw at the end of quadmester 1 that all 8 of those schools were on track for increased credit acquisition in comparison to semester 1 from the year previous. The ASLE tool, the Authentic Student Learning Experience tool, this is actually an OCDSB innovation. And the idea is that we are really trying to move credit recovery and credit rescue beyond just sort of completing assignments that need to be missed, and actually engaging students with other areas of interest, connecting to their pathways, and trying to recover multiple credits at the same time with things that are of interest to the students, and also really embrace the student voice. We also wanted to share with you that student success teachers, intermediate student success teachers, and guidance teachers have been receiving equity PD in partnership with Superintendent Baker and her department on things like unconscious bias, which is obviously important for those key roles as we're trying to provide students direction on the pathways. And you may recall also that we launched a school within a college or a SWAC program this year, which has gone very well. We have, it's full and we have a waiting list to get in, and we've already had 2 students graduate. And again, this is a program for students who have become disengaged from school and reconnecting them by giving them some opportunities with Algonquin as well. With course selection, one of the things that we've been working on with our partners in communications is a letter to go home to parents. It'll be a multilingual letter, and the idea is that we're trying to give parents more information about what they need in order to make good decisions for their children. It's the case that historically, locally developed and applied pathway courses have had lower pass rates than academic courses. And it's also the case that underserved students have been more likely to sometimes end up in those pathways. And so one of the things we want to make sure is that we're providing people with all the information they need to make good decisions. And frankly, if they're not really sure which pathway to go with, then to advise the academic pathway, because that leaves the most number of doors open to them. In terms of data analysis, we're going to be doing some work shortly with all of the secondary schools to provide them just a little more assistance in terms of how to analyze the student success data they have. And we're particularly interested in trying to put what we refer to as faces to the data. We're really trying to get to the conversation about specific students and their pathways and how we can ensure that they can be successful. We also wanted just to mention briefly Winning Attitudes, which is a program that's actually been around for a number of years in the board. It's a full-time co-op program. As you can see, there's 48 students in it currently. And again, it's another program that's designed to re-engage students who are starting to sort of fall off their graduation pathway, and has also been of great success. In terms of real-time data, as you can see here, what we're looking at is the past 5 years of data compared to quadmester 1. So you'll see quadmester 1 is down there on the right. I'm sure this will be of interest to a number of people. You will note that I think we have to be careful. There are limitations to the data. It's not a direct comparison and cannot be disaggregated against the identity-based data. But I think what you can see here is overall a positive trend, obviously, over the last 5 years in terms of credit acquisition. And also note that in quadmester 1 that our positive trends have continued, which is obviously great, and I think is a tremendous credit to our schools, our teachers, and our admin teams who have been working really hard to ensure that we continue to move forward on these really important initiatives. And I think is obviously, it's clear from this report that we have a ways to go, but also there are some good signs about some of the work we've done and the positive impact that that's having. This is just, again, a quick sort of summary of the pieces reviewed. So for the sake of brevity, I'll maybe just hold the conversation there and pass it back to Executive Officer Giroux.
Thank you very much. So a fulsome report in terms of next steps on the identity-based data. We continue to develop our capacity, particularly understanding of disproportionality and disparity and how we address those issues. And that's something that we need to grow our capacity across the system. As you know, we have been taking a phased approach to the analysis of that data and reporting out in terms of next steps. We are starting work now on a report on elementary and secondary achievement and streaming, and we hope to have that to you May, June of this year, and also looking at sense of belonging and the sense of belonging data that was included in the IDB survey, and that report will come to you in the fall of 2021. As we work through these issues, we have some data governance issues, and we continue to work and refine our practice there. And we're making good progress, but that governance capacity comes in time. And for the trustees, one of the things we've noted as we go through our learning, we recognize that there's probably some opportunities for professional development for trustees in terms of reviewing data from an equity lens. And so that's something that we also have in our work plan for trustee professional development. So I'm going to pause there. That's a huge amount of information for you, and all of us are available to take questions, and I see there are many hands up. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Executive Officer. And we do have quite a few hands up, and I'm going to go to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much, and very exciting report. And I nearly jumped out of my chair when I heard about the May-June report, so I'll look forward to that. Thank you very much. Just on background, could I be reminded, please, and I simply forget, I know this has been presented before, but when we did the identity survey, were we able to map to a student number, or was that anonymized that way?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, you're referring to the mapping to the Valuing Voices student survey? Yes, so it was not an anonymous collection. So we were allowed or able to link back at an individual student level.
So do we have an idea, and I mean these are very interesting numbers, but we have an idea about whether, I'm assuming that they must have, because it's an imperfect world, if we had varying participation rates across the groups as far as we can tell, say by looking at City of Ottawa census data and other things, or were we able to have sort of an independent means of verifying and maybe trying to determine to what extent our participation rates may be skewing things or not?
So through you, Mr. Chair, and of course we didn't include it in this report, but we are also simultaneously working on a more detailed technical report, which will include some of the analyses that we did undertake, looking at distributions of students before we pulled the data sets together. So to understand kind of coverage or differences potentially in those who responded to Valuing Voices versus those that didn't. And so based on the analyses that we did, we're fairly confident that we have no huge gaps, if you will. There were a couple of anomalies, but nothing that rose huge flags around whether or not we're missing voices.
Fantastic news on all counts. Thank you very much. Just can I ask, I noted, and I don't have the reference for you, but you'll probably recall it, I'm sure, the decision to report on an inclusive basis. And I think I understand the rationale. It's valuing all things, making sure you have maximum data. But is there a reason why we couldn't do both, say, inclusive and exclusive? So maybe we could drill down if someone had reported as having effectively a unitary identity, perhaps disproportionalities might be greater, right? Say. I don't know. So I guess I'm just sort of wondering if we consider doing that, or maybe have done.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we have in fact looked at the calculations across each of, there were 3 different grouping decisions that we considered. And so as part of, again, our background check, we did look at the disparity and disproportionality calculations for the exclusive groups as well. And again, the values themselves differed slightly, but there were no sweeping or glaring gaps. And so again, those will likely form part of the technical documentation so that folks have a very clear understanding and transparent understanding of those results.
Well, I'm just bouncing. This is great. Thank you very much. Can I ask another question? I noticed there seemed to be an unresolved question about threshold setting, and maybe, I guess, looking with respect around, district school boards, maybe talking to the ministry about how that would be set. But that strikes me as a strange discussion. Doesn't that just fall out of, statistical significance and like normal stats? So I guess I'm not understanding. Maybe that can be explained.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the data standards are quite clear that the establishment of thresholds must be done in consultation with community. So that is part of the work that we will be doing with TAG. this year. We have reached out to other boards. We've searched various places. There are a couple of other sectors that had begun this work before the education sector. The methodologies that may have been employed are not that easily found. And so I agree that I'm sure that there are some statistical procedures or methodologies, and the READ team is actively engaged in those discussions right now and reaching out to some of our peers across the province to look at some of the methodologies that they've employed as well.
Thank you very much for all this. And paragraph 14 or section 14 refers to open data policy development. Can you just provide a quick sketch of that?
Maybe I'll pick up there. That's part of the governance work that we identified in that earlier slide. And so when we did the first report, we released sort of an Excel file, but we have growth to do in terms of releasing an open data file. We don't have an open data policy yet, and that's a pretty sophisticated undertaking in itself to contemplate that. We raised that this week in conversation with Business and Learning Technologies. We were talking about IT and IT security and where that fits in as, you know, in relation to that. And, you know, I'll go back to your question about the thresholds and Manager Orachewski's answer, because I think her response was, you know, the subtext of her response is, we are really at the front end in the province in terms of using these data standards. And so we don't have a lot of opportunity to discuss with colleagues. We are fortunate that we've created that tag team, folks who really have the capacity to have data conversations. But of course, they're new, some of them, to the school board environment. So we're on a series of learning journeys, and we'll see that. But I wouldn't anticipate we'd have that data governance policy stuff ready before the middle of next year at the earliest. First goal is to try and get through these reports and improve our understanding.
Thank you very much. I could ask more questions, but those are the main ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. Really appreciate that. And moving on to Trustee Huff.
Well, Rob, you got my question about statistical significance in there. I was just going to wear my data geek hat for a minute, because it really did seem an odd situation to choose not to just use a simple analysis of variance of some sort that would allow us to say whether there was a statistical significance in these proportional distributions. So your answer was very much appreciated. And I have to say that I do appreciate very much the approach to the data of looking from the disproportionality and the disparity perspective. It really does make it a little bit more rich in terms of interpreting what we're seeing and how we're thinking about it, because it's not just about the numbers, it's about what those numbers mean. So I appreciate the foray into that level of discussion. My remaining question following Rob is, what do you think the impact will be for the data that will be collected from this year with such a significantly different model of learning and scheduling and approaching the credit system? Are you expecting this to be a major blip in your data collection and your data analysis series?
I'll start, and Manager Orachewski may want to add to it. We are definitely in a different spot altogether in terms of data collection, because we won't have EQAO data, which forms the basis of much of our analysis. We will be able to look at credit accumulation at the end of the year in a more fulsome way. The interim slices of that data are fairly complex, so we don't want to necessarily keep slicing because of the volume of work. We are maybe fortunate that we had already started rethinking what the annual student achievement report looked like, because we were undertaking the identity-based data. And so you're absolutely right that we aren't going to be able to do the kind of analysis over time on some data sets that we have done in the past. What that is allowing us to do is go deeper a little bit in the identity-based data. So that'll be the trade-off. I don't know, Joan, if you have anything else you want to add there.
Just maybe very briefly, there are some years that we've had blips, as executive officer has pointed out, with our data. And so while we do some internal checks and balances before we produce anything, for me, it's about making sure that the context within which the results are being presented is also included, so that people can understand what might be contributing to any seeming anomalies that we're seeing from one year to the next.
Well, I would just like to add a big thank you for that, because the interpretation, as I said, is the important part. And the next important part is what Superintendent Hardy was touching on, was really where we're going with this. And it is impressive to sit here in this chair and be part of this team and see the steps forward that are being taken and the proactive reach into the schools to make a difference for these kids. So hats off to all of you. This is great work, and I am also looking forward to much more data coming our way in the future.
Thank you very much, Trustee Huff. That's all your questions? And then moving on to Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. Good report, important information, but I'm interested in where we go from this. I was glad to hear the mention of the high schools that struggle, two of which are in the zone I represent, and one of which we just had a report on last month on their credit, grade 10 credit accumulation, Gloucester. And it went from 58% in 2017, and it's now down to 51% in 2019. Grade 10 credit accumulation, I've been trying to get the board to focus on schools that had, you know, Rideau High School and Ridgemont, which was mentioned by Superintendent Hardy, among with other schools. They're not the only ones. And I've been fighting for years to try to get the resources and a strategic plan to address it. And I've been frustrated all those years. So I'm hoping perhaps I can hear what the strategy is to help these schools and perhaps the feeder schools that were mentioned by Superintendent Hardy as not having the board average of grade 10 credit accumulation. And a comment perhaps on, I've always felt that we haven't, we as trustees and as a district have not allocated robust enough resources to address this long-standing credit accumulation shortfall amongst a number of our schools. Staff comment?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'll start the comment in response to that and turn it to Superintendent Hardy. Trustee Ellis, this is, you've probably asked the most critical question when it comes to thinking about instruction. Because after all of this data is interesting, but what really matters is what does it do to help us to program better for our students. And I took note that Superintendent Hardy, in his identification of schools that require further attention, identified these students as groups of students who have been underserved by us and our system, and we have to take ownership for that. And that is the data piece. Superintendent Hardy made reference as well to faces on the data and understanding who these students are. So I will give a lot of kudos to the team as they have identified very specific schools where there is a pattern in data that requires interruption. And you will have heard Trustee Ellis at the beginning of my comments, at the beginning of the night, when I referred to the Sankofa Student Excellence Initiative. And this is essentially the student initiative around using the graduation coaches to granularly reach to the specific students and move them along. And so the approach is multifaceted. It's not just about credit accumulation. It's about maintaining engagement, ensuring graduation, and ensuring a path to success. So I do, please know that your points are not only well taken, but they are actually fundamental to the initiatives we are undertaking to use this data for. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Hardy. I hope I haven't stole your thunder, but I do want to convey our commitment to this, because it is the crux of our work. So Superintendent Hardy, go ahead.
Yes, and through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Trustee Ellis. I think I concur, obviously, with the Director. It's really important. And I think, when we're talking about the G8 schools, which we sort of identified, I guess, back in a year ago, November, and then started working with them in January, it was very much about recognizing that we need a differentiated model, and obviously not all schools are in the same place. And I think, obviously, when we talk about some of the students and the groups that are identified in the IDB data here that we have, this is really helpful to us, obviously, because we're getting more granular. But again, within the G8, we know that there are schools there, obviously, where we have, those are schools where we have grad coaches. Those are schools where we know we have larger numbers of Indigenous and Black students. And so, I think what we're seeing in this report is it's going to allow us to be a bit more granular, I think, as we move forward. In terms of some of the strategies we're taking, one of the things I alluded to quickly there, it was how we're using experiential learning, for example, to build additional equity. So one of the things we've been doing is working with the schools and really tapping into student voice. So we started with them in January last year. We had a very powerful meeting with them in February, where we asked them to go and talk to students about what their experiences are, because we realized that in order to move the system forward, we really need to hear directly from students about what is and is not working. With the experiential learning piece, what that's allowing us to do is to actually reconsider how school is being organized. So for example, Hillcrest this year, as a result of work we did in the spring with their ELL students, are putting them into 2 credit packages, basically, where they're able to engage in longer learning with the same teacher and this sort of thing. So we're also looking at, what is the structure of the delivery? And the other thing with experiential learning is we're really focusing on the importance of meaning and how are we actually engaging students in their learning so that they want to come and they, and that they're active participants, and also that they feel like their voice is being heard. Again, I could talk about this one for the rest of the evening, but I will hold my comments there.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear it, but over the years when I've raised it, for Rideau and Ridgemont and trying to put some focus on it, I'd get a number of platitudes, and I'm not saying this is platitudes, but I haven't seen any significant increase in these schools, which we've known have been struggling for more than a decade now. So I'll hope that we do it. Just my last comment is I don't think we're throwing enough resources. We need to be bold to overcome these deficits that other parts of society are dropping at our doorstep to have our students overcome them. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ellis. And we're going to move on to Ms. Lamba.
Okay, thank you. So this report was really detailed, but I do want to build on some of the comments made. So this is a lot of good quantitative data. And so I think before strategies can be built just based on numbers, the qualitative is really important. Like, why are these students from these particular communities not succeeding or getting the 16 credits, right? Because just from my experience, I've seen people identify a problem and then throw solutions at it, and then it's not effective. So it's really important to be very systematic. So you've got the data, right? And it is quantitative, and I'm hearing that it wasn't unexpected, right? It was probably known. And at some schools, it's more than others. So where's the next step around gathering? Why are these communities of students not getting the 16 credits by grade 10? And I heard a little bit just in the last comment around, well, we're talking to the students, right? And getting that data. So can you just talk a little bit more about how you're gathering the qualitative? And I have more questions, but that's one.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'll start with that, responding to that, because it's important for the trustees and our community to know that this project actually started with asking the questions about people's experiences and gathering qualitative information. And so there was a lot of work done to hear from the community, not just about what needed to be gathered and what questions need to be asked, but why. The other piece, and I know trustees who have listened to me for the past 2 years have heard me use the expression triangulation of data, because we know also that there has been an abundance of research in Canada, the GTA, in Ontario in general, that does speak to the why it is that Black students, Indigenous students, in some situations, students who identify as female or male or with gender diversity are experiencing a disengagement from school. And so, to be quite frank, there is an abundance of material that in fact supports the quantitative information we have captured in the voices of our community right here in Ottawa, but also in the research. And so when it is that we start to look at some of the solutions, and I did reference the Sankofa Center for Excellence as one structure that is focused on supporting students who identify as Black, that there are some very specific focused pieces around engagement. So one of those things, for example, is the curriculum. What is the curriculum? How is the curriculum engaged? And how does it, in fact, reach to specific groups of students to ensure that they are seen in the classroom and they know that they are seen and identified as being seen. Another key piece is about teacher expectations. We've heard multiple conversations about how it is we need to work more closely around culturally responsive approaches through guidance, through discipline, and through parent and community engagement. And so there are structural pieces that we have heard directly that we need to start correcting. And those pieces are actually being undertaken structurally to make those adjustments. Perhaps Superintendent Hardy, you might make some more specific comments than I have.
Sure, yeah, it's just in relation to sort of a specific example. So, one of the things that we've heard, for example, with regards to ELL students is there can be a great deal of frustration with the length of runway that we give them. So for students who are new Canadians and have only just recently come to the country, and especially in high school, obviously, we sometimes, the pathway to their success and their graduation is a very, very long pathway. One of the things we've heard from them is they're frustrated sometimes because we end up putting them in grade 9 classes, even though they're older and this kind of thing. So we're exploring that with those ELD programs and in conversation with Superintendent Baker's team as well. Another thing that we've been working on with IAL and the equity team, for example, is how can we do a better job of assessing student learning that they bring with them and ensuring that they have more credits as they're coming into the system. And so we're working on a process that will be connected to the FRC, which is where all the students sort of come in through, to ensure that those students are being granted more credits or equivalent credits for learning that they've done prior to coming to us, and ensuring that that pathway from the moment they arrive to us through to their graduation is one that's successful successful and one that's not going to lead to frustrations, because sometimes what we're seeing is they're running into frustrations and then we're starting to lose them at that point. And so that would be a specific example of the way we're sort of building on the voice. And of course, we see that in the data, and that was reinforced in the data that we see tonight. But as you pointed out, it wasn't a huge surprise because we already knew that there was concerns about ELL students, and that was why we, have focused on the G8 in part.
So thank you for that. I would also be interested to know, because we know there are overrepresentations and issues of suspensions. Is suspensions leading to grade 9 or 10 students not getting credits, right? The length of suspension. So I think more of that kind of analysis and looking at other factors that could be influencing. So that's great that that work is being done. Another one was around the intersectionality. I think it's important to break those down even by race, by gender as well, right? Because I think those will be factors to see if there's, Black men, Black women, like how are they being impacted, and with other equity groups. But another interesting trend that I'm generally seeing out there in the census world is actually around the Arab community. So they seem to have an increasing rate of unemployment, high poverty rates, and so on. They're coming up as being a very disadvantaged group, and it's actually showing up in your data. So I don't see anything specific to other communities other than Indigenous and Black communities. So what are some of the steps to, I think the Latino community was the next one, right? And then also in the disabilities community, and then also in the gender identifying groups as well that we saw. So I was just curious what your thoughts were around that. And I see my time is gonna end there.
So I can jump in here through you, Mr. Chair, and very relevant questions, Ms. Lamba. So indeed, we are seeing, and the data shows not just in this report, but the previous report around the realities faced by Middle Eastern students. And of course, there is an intersection there with language realities and faith diversity realities as well. And so one of the things that when we start to look at some of the specific moves, we've talked about some structural moves that are identified with a focus to Black students and Indigenous students. But we also recognize that with the nature of the diversity and the impact that identity has on performance, that we have been working on how it is that our classroom, school structures, and engagements in school communities are in fact culturally responsive. And so how it is, Superintendent Hardy has made reference to language, but we also need to make reference to some of the components of schooling that are in fact engaging. So in some cases, it's our parent communities that have felt marginalized and disconnected from school. And this is where we have done a lot of work, and we're learning in our work around how it is that we are communicating, reaching out, making sure that parents and families understand how it is we are here to serve. One of the specific areas around that is currently we're undertaking course selection. The course selection process for our students, particularly going from grade 8 into grade 9. And we have turned our minds to how is it that communities like the communities you've identified find a voice so that they are able to ask questions and know that that information is coming to them. Because with our grade 8 students, our parents and families are very influential in which box is checked. And we know that where those students start out impacts where they finish. So that's a specific area where we realize that work needs to be done, and we are starting to do our focus. Have we covered every box? Have we covered every angle? No, because as we continue to start to learn, we're also learning from the community, not solutions that we dream up, but in fact what they need so that we are able to respond and partner. We've learned too that some of our community partners are more than willing and prepared to help us to do some of this work. And we are learning how to make those connections and maximize those partnerships better. I can't tell you enough about how it is that our MLOs have supported us, but we continue to learn in this work. So do we have all the answers? No, but certainly the questions that you have asked take us to the very specific piece, because one of the things that we've learned, and to use Trustee Ellis's term, platitudes don't help. So understanding faces on the data, who our kids are, what they need, and using specific strategies, and then measuring afterwards, that's the way we'll move the needle.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. And it is 9:06. So, and even though this is a fantastic discussion, I'm going to interrupt this for 5 minutes to have a bit of a break for everyone. So right now it is 9:06. So I'll see everyone back here at about 9:11, 9:12. And I do have the people with your hand up. I've preserved your name on my list right here. So we'll see you all in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. If trustees could just turn their video on temporarily, just so I could see that we're all back. Okay, I see that we are back. So let's get started again. And on my list, I have Trustee Scott, followed by Trustee Lauer, followed by Trustee Fisher, followed by Trustee Schwartz. So go ahead, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't need a lot of time because a number of comments and questions have already been raised. Just picking up on the issues that were raised in part by Trustee Ellis and in part by Ms. Lamba. I think one of the things I would really love to see more information on is the whole intersectionality piece. When, for example, we look at our ELLs, and our Middle Eastern students, are the Middle Eastern students showing fewer credits relative to other groups because they also comprise a significant proportion of our ELLs. And then there's the question, which is always with us, and that is, what is the impact of poverty on all of the data? Where we are seeing students who seem to be underachieving, but may well be underachieving primarily because they are underserved. So I guess what I would like to know is when and how we can have some deeper analysis connecting some of those intersectionalities and having a really good look at what kinds of support we actually are providing to specific schools. Because if we're going to talk about individualizing and personalizing the way we provide education, we need to understand who our students are. As the director said, we need to see them and they need to know that we see them.
So good question. And there was a question earlier about what will we do if we don't have data, and where will we go deeper? And I talked about our ongoing learning journey. And you're getting at some of the things that come next, both in our learning and where we might go in our analysis. You know, the other thing we talk about with this data is how long will we use this data set, but we won't exhaust all the potential of this data set before we have to move to the next collection. One of the, you know, if there are opportunities in COVID for the READ team, it has been increased ability to be collectively working as a team and going really deep in these discussions. And they wouldn't have the same capacity to be going as far and as fast and as deep if we didn't have some other things not at play. So I say that as a sort of precondition. So we will go deeper, but we need to have the knowledge and the comfort in order to go deeper. The other thing is, we need to differentiate between what we have to do at the system level and what we have to do at the school level. And this gets a little bit to some of the other concerns. So we have provided, while we're not doing school-based reports, schools have their individual data report, and they can't correlate it to students, but what they can do is look at the trends in the district-wide data and look at their own student population and start to ask questions about what do they see of the trends in the district-wide data in their own population. And in fact, the RE team has created a series of guiding questions for them to help shape that and move that along. And we talked at the front end about our duty to grow our capacity, not just at the RE team, with trustees, with our principals, and with our teachers. So the more we present, the more there's an urgency for more, and we're certainly share that sense of urgency and are trying to get there in as many ways as we can.
Thank you for that. I think the one answer or the one further question I would raise is whether at some point down the road it would be possible to share with us the kinds of guiding questions that you are sharing with our school staff. Because I think it is important for us to understand what kinds of things we're expecting to be asked, and particularly to consider whether there are any other things that maybe should be asked.
That's a good point. And I spoke earlier about trustee professional development on using or looking at equity and data. And so we might, as part of that, think about, what are the guiding questions that we use at the district level? What are the guiding questions for trustees? What are the guiding questions for principals? And that might also help us to do a little bit more exploration about different data, use of different data and different indicators for different purposes. So really great suggestion, and we'll look to do that when we get to that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And moving on to Trustee Lyra.
All right. So I think everybody around this table looks at the data that we have and agrees that we have a problem. And we've heard a number of times about what our next steps could possibly be. But I want to ask a question of my colleagues, and that is one step past next steps. What is our final goal? What is the end position at which point we can say, I think we've done it, I think we've succeeded? Because when I look at what I think the end goal should be, I say all of our equity-seeking groups should be within the error of the data of the median or the average or the middle. I don't think any of our equity-seeking groups should be substantially below the line. And we've talked about equity a number of times tonight and across the couple of years that we have been trustees together. And sometimes when we say equity, we mean equity of outcome. And sometimes when we say equity, we mean equity of opportunity. And if we're going down the route that I think we're going down, we're heading towards equity of outcome, because we're trying to say these groups need additional supports to get the same outcome as these other groups. And so I would like to hear from my colleagues to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I don't know if we are. I don't know if everyone has the same end goal as I do. And it's really hard to design and discuss programs if we don't all have the same goal in mind. And so I don't have a question for staff. I've heard a number of excellent things discussed this evening, but I do want to talk with the rest of the trustees around the table. Do you have the same end goal as me? Are we all trying to have our equity-seeking groups be at that average bar? Is that our goal? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lara. And moving on to Trustee Fisher.
Thanks, Keith. I think Lyra's just asked the $1 million question. which I fully support. We're certainly not going to do this report and conversation justice tonight. You know, we know these issues are important, and we need to carve out the right amount of time, I think, to delve deeper and to really try and you know, come up with answers to the questions that I think Lyra has asked, because they are extremely important ones. The other thing I would note, and I think this touches a little bit on what Lyra was saying as well, is you know, we have been fortunate to be able to develop lots of surveys. We've been able to generate lots of data. We've been able to gather lots of insights on a whole range of issues over this term, but also previous terms. So much so, you know, I'm starting to believe that we're starting to drown in data. And I'm also, as I've raised before, questioning whether or not we've got the full capacity to really understand the you know, what this data is ultimately telling us. You know, we've talked about this data set, we've talked about intersectionality, we've talked about student base, employee data. There's no shortage of data. So I have a real concern about going down another data hole without having a really good conversation and understanding about how do we ultimately utilize that data in driving towards a certain outcome, and being very clear about that outcome. You know, I just get this sense that we're now going off on another data tangent, and while it's important, you know, going off of too many of these data tangents, you'll end up getting nowhere. And so that's my concern here. And so I fully endorse what Lyra was saying. I don't know how we carve out that conversation, whether it's at the retreat or some other opportunity, but it needs to be had, and we need to have a clear understanding of our, you know, how we're going to leverage data to guide our work going forward. Because you know, I've seen so many different data threads now. I don't know ultimately how we're optimizing that data and using that data for decision making. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Trustee Fisher. And moving on to Trustee Schwartz.
It would be great in some respects to have staff comments about what I've raised and what Lyra has raised, because I think they were important points.
If, I'm giving staff the opportunity to answer Trustee Fisher's questions first.
Through you, Chair. So there are lots of questions there. I think that it is the two questions that I draw from what has been shared by the two previous speakers is one, do we have, and when I say we, I mean the big we with everyone around the table, do we have a common understanding and a common agreement when we talk about equity, what we mean? I do agree with Trustee Fisher that is, I think Trustee Fisher, the way you put it was $1 million question, and I would agree. It is a point that I have raised in a variety of different conversations. Until there is some common understanding about what we mean when we say, then there will be lots of interpretations about what should be done about the information as it arises. So that is a key piece. And the second key piece was the one raised by Trustee Fisher pertaining to how much information do we really need in order to know that what the nature of the problems are and what, you know, give us a signal about what we need to do about it. Because data is interesting, research is interesting, and anyone who has done any research or reading in areas where they're passionate goes to the bibliography and continues to read and research some more. But that can really stymie whether or not you actually do something. I think that to speak plainly, the data is not surprising. It is clear that we where the issues are, where there are populations that are underserved, where there are challenges. The question is what do we want for these students? What do we want to commit to these students? And I think that that's where Trustee Lara and Trustee Fisher are going. We do have an opportunity that is coming up on February the 16th, where we will have a presenter who has a significant level of sophistication around this area of work, particularly as it pertains to human rights. And more than one trustee has said on previous occasions that education is indeed a human right. And so who gets to avail themselves of the best opportunity there. One of the questions Trustee Fisher raised was how it is that we will use the data to inform decision making. That's a more difficult question. I think that there are a few steps first to get to that point. The common understanding and agreement about what it means and how much data you really need, not only to identify what you need to do, but how to measure whether the needle is moving. Those are the two first questions. And in terms of the application of the data in the decision-making piece, that may be a more complicated approach or a complicated piece. I'm not sure that I would be able to respond to that or advise on that at this particular point without learning a little bit more and perhaps without getting to the two first steps. So those are my initial comments that I can think of. And in terms of a structured time for that conversation, I think that there are some opportunities. There are two key pieces that I think will be helpful to getting us to that conversation. The first being the session that is being held next week on the 16th, but the second being the next in the line of reports, because that adds one additional piece to the conversation. And then I think that as trustees begin to construct the board work plan for next year, it might be after having had these iterations of discussions and opportunities to learn and to converse together, that those might converge in informing the next board work plan as it emerges for the 2021-22 school year.
Thanks, Madam Director. And if I have any time left, the only sort of parting comment I would sort of provide is that, in some of these areas, whether it's, obviously this data is relatively new research, but the intersectionality work that we did and other data dives that we've done over the last couple of years, I just see, some of that work moving at a relative slow pace in terms of being able to elevate it up into, how does it really define the changes we need to make to programs or, system approaches that ultimately will get at some of those underlying issues. I just think in some cases we need to figure out how we build the capacity to understand, but also to accelerate some of that change can happen, because it's in some cases it's been painfully slow from my perspective. And if we need extra resources to accelerate it, then we need extra resources to accelerate it.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, and I appreciate this report being brought forward and all of the very rich conversation that I think we've all been having. And I just want to build off of what Trustee Fisher was just saying, and the responses also heard from the director. I think at the end of all of this, it really is about making sure that all of our students are succeeding in the differentiated ways that their learning needs dictate. And my question really, and I don't know if this was addressed during the presentation, and if it was, I apologize, I missed that. But I want to understand, because we're talking about an underserved group. You've identified this G8, and that's great. I love the fact that that's kind of being identified, and that those are the schools that are really being focused on. But those are also the schools where we know those underserved kids are also disproportionately being impacted by COVID, and the COVID with the pandemic in terms of access to resources. We knew early on that it was, certainly in younger grades, access to computers even. So I'm wondering how we might build some of that into sort of the future data sweep or the data pools that we're looking at, because I do think it's going to be a bit of a blip, but we need to be very conscious of what this learning year has done to those students in particular that we already know are underserved. And so I would be curious to know from staff, because I'm sure you've been having conversations about this, like how you're planning to deal with a bit of those gaps that we do know that those are, you know, disproportionately affected communities during the pandemic already. So I'm just wondering what the additional tools might be, not just in the data collection, but also perhaps in how we are managing to deal with those students and focus even more heavily on their success. And I think, as Trustee Fisher was pointing to, really looking at our resources and perhaps looking more into the coming year, how we push a little further and resource it better because of that disproportion.
So excellent question. Thank you very much. Your question touches on a range of issues, and it's not an easy or simple answer. And I can talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing. I'm sure that the staff and learning support services and the equity team have other pieces as well. We may not get through all of those tonight, but one thing that we are doing is under PPM 164, we have an obligation to monitor the remote learning experience. And in our district, we've expanded that to all students, parents, and staff, and differentiated between OCV and in person. And that sort of gives us, you know, a take the pulse kind of assessment. And that helps us to, you know, adjust our course as we're going. So we did that first data collection in October, and we were scheduled to do the next one at the start of January. And we pushed that back when we went to remote because we felt that, you know, the response would be very much guided by the that one instance. So we're just gearing up to do that. In the next week, we will launch that next exchange, and we've done a few things with the questions where we didn't think we were really getting feedback. We've gone back and we've looked at the questions. In some cases, we've met with Student Senate to find out, you know, what would students like the questions to be? How could we tailor them? We've tried to strike a balance between consistency in the questions so that we can compare over time, but also pull out those questions that are not as germane or adjust to the circumstance of this year. So watch for that, that's coming. And there will be a third collection of that data set. And so that's one piece of it. That gives us that sort of ability to take the pulse and then to monitor over time. With Superintendent Hardy, one thing we've been talking about is how do we go deeper in understanding particularly the student feedback and what that means. And we've got a sort of model that we're going to try after this collection where schools will work with smaller groups of students and try and have some conversations and bring some groups of students together to go a little bit deeper and try and explore, you know, what does it mean to be anxious? What are the root causes of that anxiety? How can we understand that? And what then are the right strategies at the school level or at the district level to fix it? We also have the last time, because of our regular partnership with OPH, and there's a CHIO rep on there, we've shared some of that data with the CHIO staff as part of their, to inform their thinking on that sort of broader well-being of the student population. And so that gives a different perspective to the data. And then public health has done some surveying as well. So that's another part of it. And then the next piece that I'll speak to is, you know that we did the OECD study on the development of social and emotional skills, and we're anticipating that report, at least the international report, sometime this month or in March. and then later this year, the local report. Now that data was collected pre-pandemic, but we're very interested in what can we learn about that, learn from that about how students develop social and emotional skills, and how does that connect to what the experiences have been this year. So that's my sort of response from collecting feedback and a little bit from the research perspective and where we're going. I think that there are some other initiatives that Superintendent Hardy touched on in terms of what's happening with his folks or with the equity team. And again, there would be the mental health and wellness team that are also doing some work.
Okay, Trustee Schwartz, good? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Trustee
Yeah,
Bell.
sorry, I ran out of time, but I wasn't really talking about the social and emotional health aspect. I was talking about the fact that these are students who are already at risk, many of them, and they're disproportionately further at risk because of the pandemic. And we need to figure out how we factor that into the collection of data. That's okay. Thank you.
Chair Penny, if I may.
Yes.
So just to be specific to that question, Trustee Schwartz, we do recognize that we do have vulnerable communities and that there's a double impact, and so that's not lost on us. There's already data there and already qualitative information there. OLIP earlier in the fall did a report, they called it a dialogue report on the impact of COVID on racialized and marginalized communities. That report has been shared with TEC and the family school superintendent, so we know who those communities are. So what are we doing? One of the key pieces is you've already seen the efforts that have been made to ensure that the communication around safety and any communication pertaining to school, we're working very hard to expand our capacity to translate and interpret so that we know that our families have access to the information and know how to ask for information, because lack of information and a lack of communication is an intimidation factor for these and further marginalizing these communities. But we also know, and I said this in my comments before we started the school year calendar conversation, that we also have to recognize that we are going to be receiving students back with us in September who have had a variety of different experiences over this past year. And so Program and Learning has already started to develop a very localized assessment process that we are able to use in our schools and in our classrooms so that we understand our students and how it is that we are going to be programming to address the experience that they had and to bring them along to where they need to go. So that is already we're not waiting for somebody else to do that. We're not waiting for the government to tell us about that. We have already started to do that. When we talked about some of the decisions that are going to need to be made around staffing, around stability, around keeping timelines, and around budget and funding, these are some of the pieces that will come into play in that conversation. So there are multiple pieces there, but I think that the key thing, if I'm going to end off with the last piece, is that, and I said this again earlier, I'll say it again, and you will hear me repeat it through this process as we plan for next year. We know that our students who have experienced some of these vulnerabilities do better at school. Our students who are who require special education needs, who have complex needs, whether they're because of special education or physical needs, or whether it's vulnerability needs or SES needs, complex needs are best met when students are able to come to school. And so what we need to do is build a public confidence that our children are coming to school, they come to bricks and mortar, and we only look at virtual options as an alternative and an accommodation in certain circumstances. So how we build that public confidence is going to be key, and that should inform some of our decision making as we go forward in this budget and staffing process. Am I getting at the questions you were asking?
Yes, thank you. That was both between you and Michelle. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I might remind trustees that we do have some minutes from meetings where there are two motions. So if we could please just keep our questions as brief as possible, really appreciate that. And we're moving on to Trustee Bell. You're muted, Trustee Bell, unfortunately.
I said I'll try my best, Chair, but I have a wave of gratitude that's coming on. So first of all, thank you for this incredible report. Thank you to my fellow trustees and the superintendents for this really great discussion. Thank you, Lyra, Trustee Lyra, for the $1 million question and putting that on the table. I think most of the trustees around the table support equity of outcome, whether we understand the terminology or not yet. From what I have seen over the past little while. So I also want to say thank you to Trustee Fisher for putting on the table the issue of how do we fund this to accelerate it. And I know that this is particularly important right now as it's budget season. And so my first question is, how can we get some sort of equity report that outlines funding options that would support this good work leading to an objective of equity outcomes as part of the budget process? I'll ask my other questions just in turn because I think they can be answered. And I think if we were to put forth proposals, I would love to hear from ACE and the Indigenous Education Advisory Committee. It would be great if this report could be presented to those groups and we as trustees could hear that feedback. So I'm just wondering, will that be done? And then the last question is, did TAG see the report that was presented today? And did they have recommendations or options coming out of it to bring to our attention? Last question, and if they did, it would be great to see a report out from that as well. Thanks, that's all for me today.
Well, I'll start. So in terms of TAG's an advisory committee, and so we do a lot of thinking as a staff team, and we bring that to TAG to help inform the development of the report. So we may have the report partially written, we may have some data analysis done, we may have the report fully written, recognizing we're at different stages in our journey on this. And so they don't get the final report because their objective is to help guide and inform our thinking in the development of the report. That's not to say that we don't subsequently share the report, but there wouldn't be the kind of report that you're looking for, or they don't have that kind of response. It's more of a dialogue. And so as we get ready to build the next report, we will be doing our preliminary thinking and then going to TAG, thinking about, this is where we are in our learning, and talking more about some of those very technical questions we had earlier. That was one part of your question. I'll leave your question around the budget report because I believe that was asked at the last budget committee meeting, and Superintendent Carson did respond to that. And I'm not certain if there was another question there that was
ACE and sorry.
We certainly are always available to do the presentations to those committees if it works on their agenda and there's an interest there. So we'll follow up with those groups. I don't know that that's currently scheduled, but it's certainly possible.
Great. And just on the particular readout of the budget, if we do determine that this is a priority for us around the table and that we do want equity of outcome as an objective, would that be possible to get some sort of supplementary budget material that would help us to make the right budget decisions concerning that? Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I think what we said is we would try to identify those, particularly as staff is developing recommendations or alternative recommendations. In the coming year, it will, as it sometimes has been in the past, it's going to rely on, in some ways, a redistribution and a reallocation of resources in the system, not necessarily adding new ones. And it is a good question because over the years, as Superintendent Hardy mentioned, there have been different initiatives in the past that have used dollars. Part of the work that he and the other SOIs and the principals have been doing is trying to make sure we make the best use of the dollars that we do have and trying to make that focus. So I think our response at the budget committee meeting was we would try to make sure that that information was part of our discussions in future budget meetings and in when we get to the recommendation, including staffing.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Trustee Campbell if he has something very, very brief so that we can move on to the two important items. Trustee Campbell?
Thank you very much. I don't require a comment from staff. I do have a quick series of comments, though, for people's consideration. One in terms of the equity versus equality terminology, I would suggest that, in fact, what people have been talking about is equality of outcome across groups in any event. Equity of outcome would mean, to me, disproportionately high graduation rate for historically disadvantaged groups. In any event, that's a terminological question, and people can discuss what the appropriate words are, but I think we really need to think carefully about how we use these words. In terms of the grade 10 credit accumulation and G8 schools, by the time I understand the focus of the staff on that, it makes a lot of sense. But kids, there are feeder schools, right? And kids, for the most part, from within our jurisdiction, right, have spent 10 or 12 years to get to grade 10. Right? They're already mostly in applied courses. They already maybe 1 or 2 grades behind in terms of competency in various subjects. They may already have all kinds of issues which have frankly been unaddressed. It's important to jump on things before they entirely exit the pipeline in grade 10 and to seek to rectify what we can. And those are short-term things where we can see differences, right? Because they're about to graduate, we can see our actions are making differences. It's harder long-term to make changes at the elementary level to see differences down the road. But I don't want us to forget that. They come from someplace. In terms of the stronger measures stuff, we'll see what we can do with this budget. From my perspective, my school board has been largely inert, I have to say, from my perspective, with respect to seriously substantive equity rectification measures of one kind or another, such as radically reduced class sizes with certain groups. Additional important criteria when it comes to accommodation planning and a whole bunch of other things, which are really hard questions. Funding doesn't appear out of nowhere. If you're going to importantly reallocate or refund, someone's ox is going to be gored. These aren't easy decisions. So it goes to seriousness. It goes indeed to the question of point of undue hardship, which is in the Human Rights Code. And one of the questions I ask is, what is that? Is that just meaningless jabber, or does it mean something? Because we fund all kinds of discretionary things in terms of really nice glass atriums, in terms of all kinds of discretionary positions, high-end programs, etc. What is our point of undue hardship? Is it whatever we can do without losing market share? I don't know. But these are really hard questions. I look forward to the opportunity to discuss with my colleagues and senior staff at another point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And finally to Trustee Lara, if you could, if you have a brief point to make.
I think I do. In my thinking, the data from last year was wrecked by COVID. The data from this year was wrecked by COVID. The data from next year is probably going to be wrecked by COVID. So we're looking at least a 3-year gap in our meaningful data set. But I would really like us to consider fairly far down the road creating intentional decisions to lock in our equity support program with an intention to reevaluate it. So what that in my mind might look like would be saying, here is what we are going to do to support equity groups over the next 3 years. Here's where we currently are based on the data that we have. And in 3 years, we can look at and say, did this work or did it not? Because when I look at the data that we have, I don't know which of the supports that we're putting in work I don't know which of the programs that we initiate are the most helpful. And I'd really like to be able to see that. And I know that we're not going to be able to begin that process for at least a couple of years, and that process will take a number of years further. But I think it should be in our institutional memory, and that we should begin to think about how we implement these programs and how we evaluate these programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lara. And what we're going to do is we're going to move on to reports from committees so that we can get to the really important items in 9.4. So moving on to the COW meeting of January 6, 2021, I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the Special Education Advisory minutes of January 6, 2021. Anyone? A mover to accept those minutes? Trustee Campbell, thank you very much. Are there any errors and/or omissions to those minutes? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on those. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes. Moving on. The Parent Involvement Committee of January 13th, 2021, I'd like to call for a mover to confirm those minutes. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and/or omissions to those minutes? Trustee Bell, you do have your hand up. Sorry, thank you very much. And seeing no errors and omissions, I'd like to call the question on those. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you very much. That passes. Item 9.3, I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the extended day childcare program minutes of January the 27th, 2021. Trustee Ellis, thank you very much. Are there any errors and/or omissions to those minutes? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you, and that passes. And finally, I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the Indigenous Education Advisory Council minutes of January 21, 2021. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and/or omissions to those minutes? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on those. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Moving on to 9.4A, appointment of IAC representatives to COW and COW budget. So I'd like to call for a mover on the recommendation and substitution for Mr. McHugh. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Would you like an introduction to that motion, Trustee Huff?
Yes, I would. Let me pull this up though, so that I'm not making this up and I'm following some notes. At present, many of the board advisory committees have voice at the committee of the whole, including CEAC and ACE. The PIC has representation at COW more generally, and to the best of my understanding, due to historical relationship through OCAS. In fact, I believe that all of our advisory committees should have voice at COW, but for tonight, I will focus on this recommendation coming forward from IAC. The Indigenous Advisory Committee has, over the past 2 years, solidified its membership and its mandate, and has shown it has a strong voice to share with the board pertaining to Indigenous issues. And the committee has provided useful input to several staff reports during its tenure. However, beyond the role that IAC has and does play, it also provides us an opportunity for reflection on the issues brought to COW through an Indigenous lens, This Indigenous voice at COW would provide the board the prospect of reflection on alternative ways of knowing, being, and doing as we do our work. At this point, I would gladly invite some staff comment regarding this recommendation before we move up to discussion.
No problem. And does staff wish to comment on that?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would ask Superintendent Baker to provide us with a comment.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. This has been a conversation that has arisen at both IAC and the Advisory Committee on Equity, who have stated their support for this motion that has come forward. And being that we are on Algonquin territory, feel very strongly that Indigenous representation at Committee of the Whole and Committee of the Whole budget would not only be warranted, but is an essential part of including voice at the table. And I think that probably, I can't speak for IAC, but I think that that would accurately represent the thinking.
Thank you very much. And I did notice that Trustee Fisher had his hand up, but then took it down. Did you wish to comment or have a question, Trustee Fisher?
No, thanks, Keith. I just put it up accidentally.
No, no problem. Trustee Campbell?
Whoops, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no troubles with the first part, and I intend to support it. I think it's entirely appropriate. The second one, though, gives me some trouble with respect to the rationale. I read the minutes and I've understood the proxy oral here, but I guess territorial rights don't necessarily translate for me into voice for citizens or student rights, right? That's sort of landholders' rights. I do note in the minutes, the suggestion is made as not part of the motion that Representative be an Algonquin representative. I mean, that certainly has a historical pedigree, but we are the second biggest Inuit municipality in Canada, I believe, still, and there are many others represented in Ottawa. So at the trustee board level, I am concerned about representation. We're already engaged in a review of our representation by zone and whether we need to reorganize that in terms of, rep by pop and everything else. This would change that dynamic and necessarily.
Mr. Chair, on a point of order, that relates to the second motion, which has not been moved yet.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was a part A, part B.
No, it's two different motions, Trustee Campbell. Sorry about that.
Great, I'll save my comments for that. I'll support the first motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Trustee Scott, for jumping in there. And is there anyone that has any comments on the first part of the motion? And maybe it would actually help to have that motion up on the screen if we could, Manager Guthrie.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The motion from committee seeks to get representation. If the committee wants to move forward with that, it doesn't have to be this evening. We can take that direction this evening, but it's actually a policy amendment, and so we will have to modify the language. It's an amendment to p.010.gov, and we'd be adding two new clauses, 2.1J and 2.2J, to insert the Indigenous Education Advisory Committee. So I just make the committee aware of that. We can certainly work with tonight's language and move that in substitution at board, or you can make that substitution this evening.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Executive Officer Drew. I would suggest that because of the technical part of the language that's necessary in the policy, we would vote on this tonight and have you put that language in when it comes to board, if that's okay with everyone, because there's be another opportunity to vote on it. And so is there any other comments on this particular motion? And seeing none, I'm going to go back to Trustee Huff for a wrap up.
I don't think there's any wrap up necessary at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to call a question on this motion. And maybe we'll just do this the old-fashioned way just to save just a little bit of time for now. And all those in favor? And opposed? And abstaining? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So then, Executive Officer Drew, I'm going to count on, the board is going to count on you moving forward when it comes to board to maintain the spirit of the motion, but insert the language necessary to make the changes, okay? And then moving on to 9.4B, I'd like to call for a mover in substitution for Mr. McHugh. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Would you like introduction to that motion?
Why, yes, I would. Once again, pulling up the notes. With regard to this one, underlying this recommendation is our very own goal to develop a culture of caring in the OCDSB. We have committed to building a system capacity in equity and inclusive practice to support education, engagement, and reconciliation with historically marginalized groups. We are also, as Canadians, committed to delivering in an authentic way on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. Regulation 462-97 pertains to First Nations representation on boards and stipulates the mechanism for representation in those cases in which the board has established an agreement or agreements with the band or bands of the Indigenous students enrolled in that board. Several boards in the province, including York Region, Thames Valley, Upper Canada, Lambton Kent, and Blue Water, do have Indigenous trustees, but that it is based on this model of a purchase of service agreement with local bands and the provisions for representation outlined in that regulation. The urban reality of the Indigenous students in the OCDSB is that there are no existing agreements with bands, and there is therefore no individual on the board to represent the interests of our Indigenous students. Currently, neither Toronto nor Peel District School Boards have an Indigenous trustee. I would like to take a little foray here to say thank you to Trustee Scott for doing the homework on these boards for me. This policy is clearly in need of expansion and revision to permit a mechanism for that representation on our board, and likely that of other urban boards in the province who have a goodly number of Indigenous students not affiliated with one band or council. This is the essence of the request to the Minister. The goal of this recommendation is to ask the Minister to find a solution to this need for Indigenous representation in those boards that are not engaged in these types of relationships without stipulating the specifics of how that would be best achieved. Again, I would invite staff comment regarding this recommendation.
Thank you very much, Trustee Huff. And staff have a comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Superintendent Baker does have a comment.
I do. I think Trustee Huff has outlined all of the salient issues very, very well. And so I don't think I have anything to add except to say that she is correct in that the current regulation does not provide provision for establishment of an Indigenous trustee at the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. And therefore, this request from IAC is intended to open that consideration. And I do believe that OPSPA may have had conversations in the past around this, but I'll leave that for trustees to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we do have Trustee Campbell. Go ahead, Trustee Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll try hard not to repeat. I made several points already, so sorry about that, folks. I think we have to look at the rep by pop angle. The considerations brought by the mover and suggested by IAC are really important. I guess the question I have to ask myself, though, is in terms of pros and cons, benefits and disbenefits, if there aren't other paths, right, which can yield the same result. So shouldn't we see, IAC hasn't had committee of the whole budget representation before. Let's see how that goes. suggestions have been made of an Indigenous student trustee. The Toronto District School Board looked into this whole question. They appointed a third student trustee that's an Indigenous position because they ran up against the same regulation question. So, I mean, I think we have to, you know, what are we trying to achieve here? There's maybe more than one way to a path. But I think that if we're going to change how people in Ottawa are represented, we really have to do a lot of, if we decide we want to do that, I would only want to do that after a lot of consultation, right? We're already looking at consulting potentially on zone changes. I think if we wanted to change basic representation, then, and that was going to be our decided view, we would need to consult. And maybe consult in a targeted way with respect to marginalized groups. I'm all up for that. But I don't think we should just up and suggest this. I also need to point out what I believe is likely the logic of the rationale for legislation is not embedded in legislation. It almost never is the case. But the logic, as I understand it, for the current regulation is that appointing a voting trustee member of the board is the only way that some segments of the students, some number of the students can be represented, because bands and band designated lands are outside a municipality. They literally don't get a vote on the board. They literally can't vote for trustee. So if a services agreement is extended to them, they are provided services, but then they have no voice about how those services are delivered. Then it is entirely appropriate to extend the franchise to them, because otherwise they have no representation. This is an entirely different case. There's an entirely different situation here. I would like to move, therefore, Mr. Chair, that we postpone this motion indefinitely.
All right, that is Executive Officer, is that, can you help me with this? That's what type of motion in a legislative environment? Not referral, a deferral motion, or what?
A motion to postpone indefinitely is a specific type of motion. And I'm just, so motion to postpone indefinitely is a procedural motion. It is debatable, but not amendable. If carried, the motion to which it applies and any pending related motions shall be laid aside and may only be reintroduced by way of notice of motion at some future meeting.
Okay, so it's a motion to postpone this motion indefinitely by Trustee Campbell. And it's...
Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak as intro.
You go ahead.
Basically, I don't think we should be deciding this tonight. I think discussions have to occur about possible consultation. We have to do a lot of thinking about the legislative background. I think we need to see how the committee of the whole appointments, should that pass, or no, it did pass at board, how things play out. I think we have to maybe make this kind of thing part of our zone rearrangements discussion. I don't think we should be making the decision tonight, but I also don't want to refer to a particular committee or back to staff. I don't want to defer to a finite point in time. The postponing indefinitely doesn't mean that something is killed indefinitely. It absolutely doesn't. In the fullness of time, once we've had perhaps more experience with COW representation and in perhaps consulted and thought about this more, I think it'd be entirely appropriate to reintroduce the motion, but I'm reluctant to defer specifically or to refer specifically, and so I believe this is the appropriate mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And Trustee Lauer, did you wish to speak on the postpone indefinitely motion?
I do.
Go ahead.
So I have heard my colleagues' concerns about consultation with the community and about how the provision in the current legislation is for those who cannot otherwise get a vote. I would rather see this debated and discussed now, because if we choose not to kick it, we are debating writing a letter which will then go to the ministry saying, we'd like you to think about this, and then they are going to begin a series of consultations. There is no way that they would read our letter and say, you know what, that was a great idea, here's a blank check, because they're going to have to amend provincial law to create a different type of position. And that's going to involve a great deal of community consultation. And I think the sooner we send this letter, the sooner they can begin to think about it in Queen's Park and begin to set up those community consultations. I see no benefit to kicking this down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Laura and Trustee Scott.
I too will not be supporting the motion to postpone indefinitely. I attended the IAC meeting where this was discussed. It was very clear that as much as some IAC members would like to see us have an Indigenous trustee immediately, they also recognized that there is a process to doing this, because there is no mechanism for how would you appoint someone to be representative. The regulation that exists certainly would have to be changed, and that would take time. But writing the letter, I think, is a way to have the province begin to think about how to amend the regulation, because with increasing numbers of Indigenous students self-identifying in many different school districts, where there is probably not always an opportunity to enter into the kind of agreements that are specified in the regulation, which have allowed some boards to have Indigenous representation. This has meant that we have a significant number and a growing number of self-identified Indigenous students, and as Trustee Campbell pointed out, one of the largest concentrations of Inuit students outside the Arctic, who really don't necessarily have any representation that they can really call their own. And so I think it is important to ask the province to have a serious look at the regulation. If they changed it, then it would still be up to us to decide whether or not we actually wanted to proceed. But I don't see that it does any harm to write the letter.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And moving to Trustee Bell.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. After listening to the great conversation that we had concerning the statistics for grade 10 accumulation of credits, I think those stats speak loud and clear that we have an issue. And what we heard from the director was that when it comes to actually making a difference and pushing the envelope, being seen and seeing yourself in leadership is so incredibly important. And I think for those students to know that we're taking a step towards that, towards giving voice to a leadership that we have power over the decisions that affect them. And they don't see themselves in us around the table for the most part. And so I think sending a letter right now, I think this is long overdue. And I think it starts the wheels in motion to actually having the students that are Indigenous see themselves in leadership. And that's absolutely so important. I was also at the meeting, and we had representation from the community leaders in our community, and they unanimously agreed to this. And I think for us to go back and say, I'm sorry, we need more information before we write this letter, it is a significant step backwards in our relationship building. So I definitely will not be supporting the motion as put forth by Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further speakers to the proposed postpone indefinitely motion, we're going to go back to Trustee Campbell for wrap up.
Whoops, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe this is the appropriate measure, but I'll live by the result. If this were to fail, I do have an amendment, but I don't know if I have time left.
All right, thank you very much. And then therefore I'd like to call the question on the motion to postpone the motion 9.4B indefinitely. So all those in favor of postponing it indefinitely? And opposed? And abstaining? And the motion is defeated. And so we're back to the main motion of 9.4B, that the Board of Trustees write a letter to the Minister of Education to allow the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board to have an Indigenous trustee. And I did not have anyone on my list for that, to speak on that. I guess we've spoken a little bit about it already. But I do see Trustee Scott has her hand up. So Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to consider several things. One of the aspects around the whole concept of representation by population is that people are able to vote once for their representative on a board. And that's partly goes to the notion of having the French public and Catholic boards and the English public and Catholic boards. People don't get to vote extra times because they are French and have a child in an English board, or because they are Catholic and have a child who is in the English board. They still only get to vote once. So certainly the question of how the choice of such a representative would be done, the mechanisms for creating a position in the absence of the relative clarity of having an agreement with a local band council. Those are complexities that aren't for us to decide. But certainly, I think that it is worthwhile raising the question to the provincial government, because our Indigenous students in this area, as Trustee Bell said, do not see themselves at the board table. They did for a period of 4 years, when we did in fact have an Indigenous trustee who was elected to represent one of our electoral zones, but that doesn't happen every day. And you can't rely on that as necessarily the mechanism for ensuring that there is that Indigenous voice at the table. So I will be supporting writing a letter, and will take care, if this is approved by the board, in how that letter is crafted.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And moving to Trustee Lyra.
I'm actually going to move to end debate.
All right. Trustee Lyra is moving to end debate on this matter. And I believe this an end debate motion is not debatable.
It
is that
not.
true? Yeah. And so I'll call the question.
Mr. Chair, I'm just not sure if Trustee Lyra has spoken already.
Not to this. I
Not
spoke
to this
to
motion.
your motion.
Thank you.
Yeah. She did not speak to this motion directly. And so call a question on this. All those in favor of ending debate?
Requires a 2/3 majority vote.
Okay. And there's 8 votes there and opposed. And we had 7 votes for and 4 votes against. And so that's not quite 2/3. So that motion to end debate fails. And so the next person on that list would be, on the list to debate would be Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am persuaded by Trustee Lyer's arguments and Trustee Scott's arguments that it would be a good thing to review and consult upon the regulation with respect to whether it should be expanded. That maybe is implied, as trustees have suggested, by the text of the motion currently before us. But I guess what I'd like to do is to amend so that what we're requesting in that regard, if that is our intent, is perhaps clearer. So what I'd like to do is assist an amendment that, so it would be, the first part would be the same. The Board of Trustees write a letter to the Minister of Education, but the following would change, I think preserving the intent, which would be to ask that the regulation allowing only some school boards to appoint Indigenous trustees be reviewed.
So Manager Guthrie, can I ask you to put that up on the screen? I know it's late, but could you do that just so that we have exactly what we're voting on the screen? Or someone? Did someone capture that and we're able to display it, that amendment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to get my screen share open.
Oh, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, just in an effort of expediency, I'm wondering, do we actually need an amendment to the motion if it's a letter that's coming from the chair of the board? If there's agreement by the trustees on the general gist of the message to the minister and to the government, could we not just allow it to be done as, rather than doing it formally through a motion?
There's a motion on the floor, Trustee Schwartz. And I think that there are some trustees that like to know exactly what they're voting for.
Okay, we've done it several times before where we haven't been quite so directive with staff as well as with letters and we give the general direction. So in any case, it's just for interest of time.
Mr. Chair, I believe there's a substantive difference here.
There's your answer, Trustee Schwartz. So, okay. So this is, does this comply with your spirit of how you want it amended, Trustee Campbell? Or not the spirit of, is this how you want it amended?
Yes, thank you. That's great.
Okay, so does that serve also as your introduction, Trustee Campbell?
Just a further point then, and perhaps it's necessary then, that's fine. What has been suggested, Trustee Scott made the point that how something might be implemented exactly, how a regulation might be amended, should that happen, would have to be worked out for the minister, etc. I think that we would need to see what was being proposed before we agreed that that's what we wanted. I think that for us to say without benefit of consultation, which we're expecting would come as a result of the regulation review, that we've already decided if we could do it tomorrow, we would do it without consultation. So I think we have to be careful about putting the cart before the horse here. We may well want this, and I can see lots of good reasons for doing it. I'm not organically against the idea, but I think that what I've heard in debate and what I support, if that's what I've heard, is that let's ask the minister to review. There will be an obstacle discussion, and should this go forward. There will be consultation. I'm sure there are lots of representations will be made, and something ideally may be crafted coming out of that. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's ask for this review and then see what comes of that. So I think there is an important difference here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Lyra?
I like this less than I liked the previous version because it has removed the language about requesting the OCDSB get a Indigenous trustee. Calling for a broader review of the policy is less specific than asking for one ourselves, and our local Indigenous community has asked us through IAC to ask the minister to grant them self-determination. And I think pulling the language about specifically requesting that they review it as it relates to Ottawa goes against those requests. So I'm going to be voting against this amendment because I think it has taken a specific request and turned it into a general, broad, less specific request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further speakers to the amendment, going back to Trustee Campbell.
Nothing required. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call a question on this amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? And against the amendment? And abstaining? And the amendment is defeated by 7-3. And so thank you very much. And right now we have to have the 10:30 vote because it is 10:30. And so what I would propose is it requires 2/3 of us to agree, and that we could simply we could have a vote to finish off this item. And so all those in favor of continuing to finish off this item? And opposed? Thank you, and that passes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Yes. Yes, Trustee Scott?
Just to clarify, the 10:30 vote doesn't commit us to a particular item. It only commits us to continue past 10:30. The time when we would consider just doing a particular item would I think come at the 11 o'clock vote if there's unanimous consent to continue. But I would ask Ms. Giroux if she could clarify that.
Executive Officer?
Will clarify, but I'm going to do that by looking at the rules to make sure I'm not going based on practice, but rather on what the rules say. And naturally, I can't find the clause. Sorry.
Can we continue with 9.4 while you look?
Yes, let's continue with 9.4. And so I see there's no further speakers to 9.4. So we're going back to Trustee Huff for the wrap up on the main motion.
And this time I will take some wrap up. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their wonderful comments on this. In fact, you've provided some wonderful wrap up on this. I think there's one point that needs to be made still, and that is for our Indigenous families, no matter what ward they live in or who they have voted for and what count by population they are included in, they do not feel that they have a voice. They do not feel that they are represented by me or you or you or you or you or any of the faces that I see on this Zoom screen. And they have asked us clearly to have that voice. We have made a commitment to giving those groups of people who have not had voice a voice. We have made that commitment. Our federal government has made that commitment as well. It is time for us to take this step and make this happen. And at this point in time, the details will be sorted, the process will be figured out, but we have to start this process. We have to ask this question. And I think by keeping the question specific and germane to our board, we give a solid voice to this argument that would be lost otherwise. I'm asking all of my colleagues here at this table to make a strong voice in the right direction for the Indigenous students and families who are part of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board.
Okay, so thank you very much. And at this point, we're going to call the call the question of that motion. So all those in favor of the motion in 9.4b? And opposed? And abstaining? And thank you very much, and that does pass. Now getting back to the 10:30 vote, I believe the language is the vote is subject to limited debate on whether to continue the meeting, which may limit the continuation to the item under discussion or may specify additional agenda items or time for adjournment. So I believe it says subject to limited debate on whether to continue the meeting, which may limit the continuation to the item under discussion.
Okay, but that
Do you
was
agree,
not
Trustee
made.
Scott?
That was not made clear when we voted on it. I was under the impression we were voting to continue till 11, or we were finished the agenda.
I believe I clearly said that we would finish this item, but if you want, we. I think that was relatively clear to everyone that we would continue this item. However, we can continue to 11 o'clock if everyone wants to. but I see head shaking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask again, because we did complete the item. So all those in favor for continuing to 11 o'clock? And we need 2/3. And opposed? And that fails. And so thank you very much for we accomplished the agenda, but because the motion fails, we are adjourned.